Chapter 224. Mother, what does Madame Sure mean? What kind of vicious little bitch does she like? How dare she do this to me and Yuru? Mother, you have to help me. The general scolded me severely and said that if Madame Sure did this again, he would cut off my relationship with Duke Yong's mansion. Mother, what should I do now? Madame D cried in front of old Madame of Duke Yong's mansion. As soon as she arrived at Duke Yong's mansion, she ran to old Madame and told the whole story in detail. Countess Yong actually colluded with Ning Kaixian to do such a vicious thing and even pushed the crime of damaging the imperial gift to Qin's mansion. Old Madame was so angry that her face turned blue. She smashed her crutch hard on the ground and said in a choked voice, Go and call Madame Sure. Old Madame only had one daughter, Madame D. She loved her dearly. If it were not for that thing, she had to let Madame D marry far away. Now Madame D finally returned to the capital city. It was the time when the family was happy. However, her daughter-in-law secretly hurt her daughter and granddaughter. How could old Madame not be angry? Countess Yong came quickly. As soon as she entered the door, she was scolded by old Madame. Kneel down. Mother, what happened? Sister, what's wrong? Countess Yong said with a smile. She came over and gently patted old Madame's back. Mother, if you feel uncomfortable, tell me. I will definitely do it. It's not good to be so angry. Madame Sure, are you so dissatisfied with Yuru? Do you want that bitch to be your daughter-in-law? Don't you care about the reputation of Duke Yong's mansion? How could you like such a cheap slut? Madame D sat up, wiped her tears, and scolded. She had been wronged before, so she hated Countess Yong even more now. She threw all her evil fire at Countess Yong. Old Madame said coldly. She looked at Countess Yong silently. Sister, who do I like? What do you mean by spoiling the reputation of Duke Yong's mansion? Tell me clearly. What did I do to you? Why don't I like Yuru? If I don't like her, will I agree to the engagement between and Yuru? Countess Yong's face darkened. It was okay to be scolded by old Madame for no reason, but even Madame D also came to get her. Did they really think that she was good-tempered and easy to bully? Madame Sure, do you need me to tell you who you like? You conspired with your vicious niece to sabotage Yuru's reputation and sent a man to ruin Yuru's reputation. This man is still in our mansion. I'll send him to the officials later. Let the officials arrest this vicious woman and drown her in a pig cage. Mrs. Qin gritted her teeth and said with hatred. Countess Yong was inexplicably shocked, and her face changed dramatically. She had a bad feeling in her heart. Who is this woman you're talking about? Who else could it be? The daughter-in-law that you've always liked, the woman whom Di Yan and Di Yan have an ambiguous relationship. Mrs. Qin said angrily, Don't tell me you don't know. And what plan did you give me? If the plate is really broken, the whole Qin's mansion will be in trouble. Of course, Qin Wanru will not have a good ending, but Yuru and I will also be buried with the plate. The more Mrs. Qin thought about it, the angrier and more hateful she became. On the way here, she thought about it over and over again and had already entangled many things together. She increasingly felt that Countess Yong had bad intentions. She couldn't come up with one plan and then came up with another one. What's wrong with Kaixian? Countess Yong was stunned and said anxiously. She will be drowned in a pig cage soon. Congratulations on your good eyesight. Mrs. Qin sneered. She hated Countess Yong very much now. Of course, she said the most unpleasant words. Madame Sure, I think that since you married into our mansion, we have treated you well. Why do you want to harm my Yuru and me so much? What's wrong with your heart? How can you be so vicious? Sister, what do you mean? What do you mean by saying that I want to hurt you and Yuru? I still don't know what happened. Everything was fine before. How did it end up like this? Countess Yong's face darkened and her face darkened. You still don't know? That's right. Things have developed to this point, and you still don't know. Dian hasn't returned to the mansion at this time, right? He left earlier than me, but he hasn't arrived yet. I don't know where he has gone. Did he go to find that bitch again? When Mrs. Qin entered the mansion, she had asked the servants at the door, and they all said that they didn't see Dian come back. Madam Sure, tell me what on earth is going on. Old Madam of Duke Yong banged her hand on the table heavily, and her face was full of anger. And about the plate, I don't remember that our mansion has a set of plate bestowed by the emperor. Where did your plate come from? Why did you frame your sister with it? Tell me the truth. What's wrong with the plate? It's broken. Isn't that better? I have always disliked the girl in your mansion. She broke it, and she should bear the responsibility. Countess Yong said in surprise. Isn't this the idea I thought of for you when you asked me before, and you said it was good at that time? Mrs. Qin was so angry that her whole body trembled, and she almost slapped Countess Yong. She pointed at her and said, Madam Sure, how dare you say this? You almost harmed our whole mansion. What's going on? Countess Yong was really puzzled, and asked with a frown. If the plate really broke, how much responsibility can Qin Wanru, a child, bear? It will fall on the general and me. What you asked Yuru to say is also full of holes. She said it was a betrothal gift, but it was written on the list of betrothal gifts. Madam Sure, it's so easy for you to say it. Mrs. Qin only hated that she didn't see it clearly before, and at this time, she pointed at Madam Sure and scolded. Madam Sure, you haven't told me where this plate came from. Old Madam of Duke Yong sensed that there was more to it, and asked with a gloomy face. Mother. The sharp-tongued Countess Yong's heart skipped a beat. Mrs. Qin immediately pointed at her and shouted, Mother, you see, she deliberately wants to harm me. I don't know where she found a broken plate, and she wants to frame our mansion. Our general has just been promoted, and now is the time when the emperor appreciates him. If such a thing happens, what will the emperor think? Do you want to destroy our mansion? Madam D put all the blame on Countess Yong. Madam Sure, what's your intention? Madam Sure, where do you think this plate came from? Old Madam's face was very dark, and she was also full of suspicion about Countess Yong. This is a royal gift. I don't remember that our mansion has such a plate. The plate was placed on the table in front of Old Madam, and she had seen the old crack. Mother. Mother, please ask the servants to leave. Countess Yong looked around and said awkwardly. There is nothing that can't be told. Madam Sure, did you do something terrible behind my brother's back? Now you can't find someone to take the blame, so you put the blame on me. Mrs. Qin asked in an unfriendly tone at this time. Leave first. Old Madam waved her hand with a sullen face. The old maids and servant girls on both sides left, and the last old maid even closed the door for them considerately. Tell me, what is going on? Old Madam frowned and said coldly. Mother. Madam Qin still wanted to say something, but was stopped by Old Madam. Her eyes fell on Countess Yong with sharp eyes. Being stared at so closely by Old Madam, Countess Yong couldn't help shivering. She knew that she couldn't hide it at this time, so she gritted her teeth and said, Mother, this plate doesn't belong to our mansion. Madam of Duke Xing put it here. Although they were both descendants of lords, Duke Yong's mansion was far inferior to Duke Xing's mansion. Madam Qin's face also changed, and she said with a vigilant look, Why did she make trouble for me? I didn't know her very well before, and I didn't offend her. Tell me, why did she bring the plate to you? And why did you give it to your sister? If you can't explain clearly. Old Madam also realized that it was not a small matter, and her face became colder and colder. Mother, it was not a big deal. Originally, it was just a gesture of goodwill from Madam of Duke Xing. Hearing that my sister's current situation was taken by a widow, Madam of Duke Xing was so angry that she lent me this set of plates. Countess Yong had to tell the truth. There is a crack on the plate. Didn't you see it? Madam Qin said angrily. I didn't notice it. Besides, It was originally Qin Wanru who was responsible for it, so I didn't care so much. Countess Yong also felt a little bad at this time, and her face was slightly pale. You accepted the imperial gift without looking at it, and then dared to give it to your sister. If I knew you were so stupid, I wouldn't have chosen you as the daughter-in-law of Duke Yong's mansion. Old Madam said angrily. Mother, is there any misunderstanding? Countess Yong lowered her head in shame and said uneasily. Until now, she still didn't think that Madam of Duke Xing meant to hurt her. Madam of Duke Xing is such a gentle person in the past, and has always had a good relationship with our mansion. It is impossible for her to have any bad intention. Maybe she doesn't know that there is a crack on the plate. You are really muddle-headed. Old Madam stood up, walked around a few times, and returned to Countess Yong. Invite Madam of Duke Xing to our mansion, and tell her that there is something wrong with the plate. This Madam of Duke Xing may not be free. Countess Yong said hesitantly. Just say so. She will definitely come. If there is something wrong with the imperial gift, she will also be in trouble. Old Madam sneered. But, there is no but. Although our Duke Yong's mansion is not as good as before, it is not a place that anyone can frame. Old Madam said firmly. Yes, I will invite Madam of Duke Xing later. Countess Yong said helplessly. What about the matter that Ning Kaixian, the bitch, plotted against Yuru's reputation? Madam Qin also knew that this matter could not be plotted against now, so she suppressed her anger, stared at Madam Shi and scolded. Chapter 225. The towering palace was tall, and there were many steps going up. 2 rows of palace servants stood respectfully with their heads down, not daring to move. Further up, the palace doors were wide open. The person sitting in the main hall was the Empress Dowager. She was surrounded by several beautiful and charming concubines. They were chatting with the Empress Dowager and making her happy. The Empress Dowager was also sitting beside the Empress Dowager, but she looked very unhappy. Although she was also smiling, her smile looked a little stiff. After being reprimanded by the Empress Dowager just now, she felt a little embarrassed. Looking at the several palace concubines who were talking with the Empress Dowager enthusiastically, her eyes showed a little gloomy. A palace maid hurriedly ran in and said, Empress Dowager, Prince Chen is here. Invite him in. The Empress Dowager said anxiously. She sat up a little straighter and couldn't help showing a little urgency on her face. In the eyes of the Empress, such an expression made her more gloomy. He was just a sick and weak waste, but the Empress Dowager treated him as a treasure and didn't care about her healthy grandson. Thinking about it, it made her angry. There was no limit to her partiality. But no matter how angry she was, the Empress still had to bear it. She adjusted the smile on her face, restrained the gloominess that was inadvertently revealed, and looked at the door with a smile. Chu Luchen was pushed in a wheelchair. Everyone knew that his legs were actually fine, but he was weak. The Empress Dowager and the Emperor took pity on his illness, so they let him enter the palace in a wheelchair. Xiao Xuanzi carried Chu Luchen to the palace, still holding the cat in his hand. 2 nannies had already come over and carried Chu Luchen and the wheelchair to the Empress Dowager on the elixir tower. The palace concubines who had been close to the Empress Dowager immediately gave up their positions and retreated to the chairs beside the Empress Dowager. Prince Chen had another characteristic, that was, he especially didn't like women to approach him. There was once a palace concubine who thought that she was favored by the emperor. When Chu Luchen entered the palace, she deliberately leaned towards Chu Luchen, but Chu Luchen kicked her away. This matter also alarmed the emperor, but in the end, Chu Luchen was fine. The emperor specially asked him if he was hurt, and the originally favored concubine was directly put in the cold. She was accused of trying to get close to Prince Chen and plotting against him. With such a record, no one dared to get close to Chu Luchen. Especially after hearing the Empress's report just now, they all looked at Chu Luchen with shock and panic. Greetings, Grandmother, Her Majesty the Queen. Chu Luchen stood up to salute, but his hand had been held by Empress Dowager. She looked Chu Luchen up and down and found that he was still pale and weak, and her eyes were red. "Chen, you'd better sit down first." Chu Luchen gently covered his chest and coughed. He didn't refuse and sat down gracefully. His face was weak and gentle, but his handsome eyes were a little weak. Even so, the image of this handsome young man, who was as elegant as an immortal, still made several new blush and forget what the Empress had reported to them. They secretly looked at him obsessively. "Chen, didn't Rui and say that you agreed before? Why did you kill the 4 palace maids sent by the Empress?" Empress Dowager said helplessly. Those palace maids were all extremely outstanding and beautiful, each and every one of them could be considered exceptional beauties. When they were sent, they were all joyous people, but when they were sent back, they were all dead. It was said that not long after they entered Prince Chen's mansion, the eunuch sent by the Empress had received 4 heads before he returned. The eunuch was so scared that he crawled back. The Empress was so angry that she complained to the Empress Dowager, but she was scolded by the Empress Dowager. Until now, the Empress still felt angry. It was unreasonable for the Empress to be partial. Fortunately, this invalid would not live long, otherwise he would be a great enemy of her son. "Those 4 palace maids plotted against me." Chu Luchen coughed in a low voice again. He raised his eyes and glanced at those who were peeping at him, with the corners of his mouth slightly raised. Some of the who were sensitive hurriedly lowered their heads and did not dare to look at the handsome eyes that seemed to be full of evil spirits. "Empress, what kind of people did you choose? You sent them to Prince Chen's mansion without investigating them clearly. If something happens to Prince Chen, who will bear the responsibility?" Empress Dowager snorted coldly and turned her eyes to the Empress's face. The Empress was so angry that her nose was about to smoke. The palace maids sent to Prince Chen's mansion before were examined by the Empress Dowager. Not only did they satisfy the Empress Dowager, but they were also very clean. Why did she take all the responsibility at this time? "Mother, I didn't choose the right people." Even though the Empress was full of anger, she could only suppress it at this time and lowered her head to say. The Empress and the Empress Dowager had been mother-in-law and daughter-in-law for so many years. Of course, the Empress knew that the more she argued with the Empress Dowager at this time, the angrier she would be, so she could only be humble. In fact, it's not the Empress's fault. It's just that those palace maids are too annoying. Chu Luchen gently helped the Empress. The Empress Dowager waved her hand, and all the including the Empress, stood up and said goodbye to her, knowing that the Empress Dowager had something to say to Chu Luchen in private. After the Empress Dowager left with a group of the Empress Dowager sighed and her eyes fell on Chu Luchen's face with pity. "Chen, your uncle said that you will be fine as long as you take good care of yourself. Your uncle and I both want to find you a person who can take care of you." Chu Luchen lowered his head and looked a little sad. He slightly raised his lips with a harmless and pure smile, reached out to touch the chubby cat in his arms, and did not speak. "I was very happy when Rui and Great Elder Princess said that you relented, but why didn't you listen to her?" Of course, the Empress Dowager really knew that Chu Luchen deliberately killed those palace maids as an example to the public, but in front of others, she still supported him to prevent him from being bullied by the Empress. "Imperial Grandmother, I can't find anyone who is sincere to me." Chu Luchen lowered his head and said, "You have seen it before. When you said that you wanted to find a royal daughter-in-law, those young ladies from aristocratic families only looked at other brothers, and they had nothing to do with me." Chu Luchen's hand stroked the chubby cat in his arms from time to time. The chubby cat meowed a few times comfortably, raised its green eyes, and looked at the Empress Dowager. "Those young ladies from aristocratic families are not well educated, and I will choose another good one for you." Thinking of the scene that day, the Empress Dowager was also angry. Looking at the sad look of her most beloved grandson, the Empress Dowager felt sad. This child's life had been hard enough, and she would not allow anyone to bully him anymore. "No, Imperial Grandmother, all the young ladies from aristocratic families in the capital city know that I am a victim of illness. They don't know when I will die, and they will become widows before marrying me. Forget it. Chu Luchen raised his beautiful eyes and smiled gently at the Empress Dowager. The sadness just now seemed to be the Empress Dowager's mistake. He looked indifferent and had a gentle temperament. If it was not because of his illness, he would be the best grandson. The Empress Dowager's eyes turned red. Since the young ladies from aristocratic families in the capital city are prejudiced against Chen, then choose a new one. It doesn't matter if she is a little younger. I will help you train her until you are satisfied. As long as you tell me who you like, I will help you choose her. The Empress Dowager promised Chu Luchen. She really wanted to help Chu Luchen choose a good wife, so that Chu Luchen would not be so poor in the future, and there was no one who cared about him. What Chu Luchen said before reminded her of the advantages of being young. At a young age, at least she was not so sophisticated, and maybe she would really like Chu Luchen. Such an outstanding grandson was originally the most outstanding person, but now he fell into this situation. The Empress Dowager felt very sad. She always felt that she owed this child. He is young. And he has to like him. Chu Luchen said carelessly, and reached out to touch the head of the fat cat. The fat cat made a comfortable purr again, and meowed softly to the Empress Dowager. Let a cat like him. Prince Chen, what nonsense are you talking about? The Empress Dowager scolded softly, how can this be the standard for you to choose a wife? Then I don't want to choose. If the person chosen by Imperial Grandmother is harsh to my cat, and I am so weak that I can't even protect the cat around me. It's really better to die than to live. Chu Luchen chuckled, and his handsome eyes were clear, as if he was really just joking. But this feeling was more like talking about other people's affairs, as if it had nothing to do with him. The Empress Dowager's heart twitched. What nonsense are you talking about? What do you mean by dead or alive? Okay, I will choose a young lady from aristocratic families that your cat also likes. It was actually not difficult to make a cat like him. At that time, let the person chosen by her spend more time with this cat and touch it a few times. The Empress Dowager had already made a decision in her heart. The person chosen by her must be warned to treat this cat well, and she must not let Chu Luchen have such feelings. How could her grandson live a life worse than death? Then don't send the palace maid here. I don't like her. I especially dislike her hypocritical look. Chu Luchen nodded gently, raised his eyebrows, and continued to make requests to the Empress Dowager. Okay, there will not be such hypocritical palace maids sent to the mansion. You just wait for Imperial Grandmother to choose some good ones for you, and let them envy you. Seeing that Chu Luchen finally agreed, the Empress Dowager agreed to whatever he said at this time. Her face was full of smiles, and she had already compared all the young ladies she had seen before in her heart. She didn't need the old ones, because the old ones were too sophisticated, the noble ones didn't like Chen, and the low ones didn't like Chen, Moreover, she had to make Chen-er's cat satisfied. As long as she thought of this, the Empress Dowager felt that she had a headache. It was okay to let people like her, but she even had to let a cat like her. What the hell was this? But even if this thing was not right, the Empress Dowager felt that she still had to satisfy Chu Luchen. This child didn't even have a request in normal days, and it was rare for him to ask her for help. The Empress Dowager was full of wanting to find a female master for Prince Chen's mansion, but Qin Wanru and Ning Yuan army general's mansion got a shocking news. Chapter 226. Ran away. Qin Wanru blinked her watery eyes in astonishment. Yes, they ran away together, eloped. Qin Yu nodded. This was the information she had just inquired. After such a big thing happened, Madame D came back to complain to Qin Huayong, and then Qin Yuru also rushed to the study. With such a big noise, some well-informed servants in the mansion immediately knew. Miss, this child D seems to be a smart person in the past. Why would he do such an unreliable thing? Or is he really so good to Miss Ning? Then why did you agree to marry eldest young miss and live in our mansion? Why did you promise to sever all ties with Miss Ning? Yujia curled her lips and sent a cup of tea to the table in front of Qin Wanru. Although she was now Qin Wanru's servant girl, she grew up in Jingxin Monastery, so she was fearless in some things that ordinary servant girls did not dare to say. How could he really run away? Qin Wanru smiled, picked up the teacup, and warmed it in her hand. She said meaningfully, running away means giving up the hereditary title of Duke Yong. Di Yan doesn't have that kind of courage. They thought that Qin Yuru would definitely make a scene because Qin Yuru would not let Ning Kaixian go. The facts and evidence were all there, and Di Yan also got the hairpin that Qin Yuru hid. This was another mess. Of course, they did not know that Qin Wanru deliberately let Qing Shui fall in front of Qin Yuru. With Qin Yuru's temperament, she would definitely put away such a beautiful hairpin. If he didn't run away, why would he make a scene? With such a big scene, even if he was a man, he would be disgraced, and his character would be lacking. Does this child still want to enter the official career in the future, or just eat the salary of the title and be a playboy for the rest of his life? Yujia asked in confusion. Miss, does the marriage between the child and our mansion still count? Qin Yu was worried about another aspect. Of course, she was not worried about Qin Yuru, but afraid that Qin Wanru would be affected. The two maids focused on different things, but they both thought Di Yan was crazy. The corners of Qin Wanru's red lips curled up slightly, with a trace of almost imperceptible sarcasm. Speaking of which, Ning Kaixian was really resourceful, coaxing Di Yan to make such a scene. Even if his reputation was ruined, he still wanted to be with Di Yan. It was a good move. This move made Madame Di and Duke Yong's mansion more and more alienated. In the last life, Ning Kaixian and Madame Di secretly conspired to deal with her. The intricacies of it were not clear to her in the last life. In this life, she would like to see how they would fight each other. The muddier the water, the better. With such a mess, the pusher hiding in the back might not be able to sit still anymore. Di Yan will come back, and the marriage will be settled. But it all depends on how the two sides compromise. Qin Wanru raised her head, narrowed her eyes, and looked at the sunshine outside the window. They should be found now. Qin Huayong was in charge of the Imperial Guard camp. Although it was impossible to really send people from the Imperial Guard camp to help him find people, it was much faster to find people in private. It was often easier for military generals to mobilize people than civil officials. Second Miss, Duke Yong, Countess Yong, and the heir are all here. Nanny Yu trotted in from outside. So fast. Father's means were really extraordinary. She stood up, walked to the window, looked at the high wall outside, and frowned. Have they all gone to Grandma's place? Grandma's health was not very good. In the past, no one really took her seriously. When Duke Yong and Countess Yong came over, they didn't go to see her. At most, they sent an old maid to greet her. But now, when something happened, they all went to make trouble for her. Yes, they all went there. General, Madam, and First Miss also went there. Nanny Yu answered. What about Miss Ning? Qin Wanru thought for a while and asked. She didn't come. I asked just now, but I didn't see Miss Ning. Nanny Yu said. Since such a thing happened, Child D must have gotten Miss Ning back. But it was only Child D who came. Nanny Yu also felt strange. Let's go and have a look. Qin Wanru turned and walked out. Miss, you can't go and have a look. Nanny Yu was anxious and hurried to stop her. You are an unmarried Mississippi. You can't get involved in such a dirty thing. Madam Dowager will be angry. I'll just go and have a look. I'm afraid that Grandma can't bear it. Qin Wanru said, frowning slightly. She was really worried about Grandma. She did not expect that this thing would be brought to Grandma so quickly, which made her a little dissatisfied. Couldn't Father solve this thing by himself? Why did he bring it to Grandma? Madam Dowager has been in good health recently. She should be fine, right? Nanny Yu hesitated and said. In fact, although Madame Dowager's health was better, she was old and could not take responsibility. This kind of thing was messy, and it was related to Duke Yong's mansion. If something really happened, Madame Dowager's health might not be able to bear it. I'll go and have a look. Nanny Yu, go to Madame Shui's place and tell her not to come. Grandma must be in a mess now. If she goes there now, she can't help Grandma. She may have an accident, and it will be troublesome. As for Grandma, tell her not to worry. I will secretly watch her. After calming down, Qin Wanru had made a decision and said slowly. Miss, this is not good. Nanny Yu was still hesitating. Although she also thought that her Mrs. idea was good, she was still worried that it was not convenient for Qin Wanru to get involved in such a scandal. Anyone who got involved in this kind of thing would have a bad reputation. I'll be fine. I'll just hide behind and listen. There is a side door in Grandma's room, and it is always locked. Previously, Grandma was worried that it would be too far for me to go to the front door of her courtyard, so she specially made a key for Qin Yu. We can go through there and no one will notice. This was a good idea. Nanny Yu and others looked at each other and nodded helplessly. It seemed that this was the only way. Nanny Yu rushed to Shui Rulan's courtyard to stop her, while Qin Wanru took Yujia to Madame Dowager's Xining pavilion from the back. But halfway, Qin Yu caught up with them, panting. Miss, don't go to Madame Dowager's place. They are all at the gate of the mansion. What happened? Qin Wanru stopped and asked when Qin Yu came over. It is said that Miss Ning is kneeling at the gate of our mansion, begging us to let her marry child D. Qin Yu said with a few heavy breaths. Making trouble at the gate? Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows. This reminded her of the same scene in her previous life. Ning Caixin's younger sister Ning Xueqing made trouble at Duke Xing's mansion in this way, forcing old Madame of Duke Xing to change her mind and acknowledge her. In her previous life, not only Ning Xueqing was plotting, but also Madame D, Ning Caixin, and Madame of Duke Xing. But in this life, there was only Ning Caixin. She wanted to see whether Ning Caixin would also get what she wanted this time. Let's go to the gate and have a look. Qin Wanru turned around decisively. When Qin Wanru arrived at the gate, she did not go out directly. Instead, she stood at the side door and looked out through the crack of the door. The outside of the mansion was surrounded by people. There were 3 layers of people inside and 3 layers of people outside. A woman in plain white clothes was kneeling at the gate with her hair disheveled. She had no ornaments on her, which made her look so pitiful. A servant girl was kneeling beside her, supporting her. Ning Caixin was almost leaning on the servant girl while kneeling there. Her head was lowered, so the expression on her face could not be seen clearly. Only her plain clothes showed that she was in a bad situation at this time. Miss, are you okay? Don't scare me. Heir of Duke Xing has gone in just now. You don't have to kneel here anymore. Heir of Duke Xing will solve everything. The servant girl cried with tears all over her face. She looked pitiful. Her tears were still falling. No matter how she looked at it, she felt that the people of Ningyuan Army General's mansion in front of her were bullying this weak woman. I'm fine. I'm waiting for my cousin. He is alone. How can I bear to see him like this? Ning Caixin's voice was very low, but the few people in front could still hear her clearly. Then, the words were spread by these people who heard it. For a moment, everyone had a good impression of this weak but affectionate woman. But heir of Duke Xing asked you to have a good rest and told you that it's okay. He will definitely break off the engagement with Qin's mansion and marry you. Heir of Duke Xing will be worried if he knows that you are kneeling here like this. The servant girl wiped her face with a handkerchief and cried in panic. Obviously, she was really worried about this first Mississippi. After all, it is my cousin and I who have wronged the first miss of Qin's mansion. My cousin and I have wronged her. Even if I have to keep kneeling to apologize, it is what I should do. If I say anything at this time, it will seem that I am not sincere enough. Ning Caishian's voice was as weak as ever and intermittently said. Then, it was spread by those who heard it. The onlookers all nodded. Although this miss did not abide by the rules of unmarried girls, at least she dared to take responsibility for what she had done and was quite affectionate. The next scene was that the servant girl said a few words from time to time, and Ning Caishian answered from time to time. All of them showed that Ning Caishian had a good character and was really forced to do this. Moreover, she also hinted that Qin Yuru even framed her to harm others in order to be with Di Yan. After saying a few words, she almost fainted. At first glance, people could tell that she was extremely weak. Such a poor and delicate woman, even though she had done something outrageous, still made people sympathize with her. For a moment, sighs came from the crowd at the door. Many people had already stood on the side of this weak woman in front of them, only thinking that Qin's mansion was too bully. Since they were so affectionate, how could they break up this couple so ruthlessly? Then, some people talked about the Qin's mansion. It was said that this first Miss Qin was born by Madame D of Qin's mansion, and Madame D was vicious before. It was said that she had harmed Madame Shui in the mansion. Chapter 227. Qin Wanru was standing at the side door. The side door was not opened, only a slight gap. She could see the situation outside clearly from where she stood. At this moment, the door of the mansion was wide open. Seeing her grandmother, father, and people of Duke Yong's mansion coming out from the main door, she blinked her watery eyes and turned to look at the servants who followed her grandmother out. She called Yujie over and whispered a few words to her. Yujie nodded and went to the main door. At this time, there were many people coming out of the door. It was a mess, and everyone had servants. Yujie cleverly found a servant girl who used to follow Nanny Duan. After pointing at Nanny Duan, she quietly retreated. The servant girl seemed to be clever. She didn't go over immediately. After a while, she squeezed to Nanny Duan's side and whispered a few words. Qin Wanru stood behind the door gap, and her eyes still fell on Ning Caishian. Sensing that someone came out of the door, Ning Caishian raised her weak head and looked at Madame Dowager standing in the middle. Suddenly, she pushed away the little servant girl's support, tried to kneel straight, and kowtowed to Madame Dowager several times. She said sadly, "Madame Dowager, please help me and my cousin. Even if I have to be a servant girl, I am willing." After saying that, her body softened and she fainted on the spot. The servant girl who was pushed away was stunned, and then hurriedly rushed back and burst into tears. Miss, wake up, wake up." Madame Dowager frowned. When she was about to speak, Nanny Duan whispered in her ear. Madame Dowager nodded, and her eyes fell on Countess Yong. She said coldly, "Countess Yong, is this the reason why your mansion wants to break off the engagement with Yuru?" After saying that, she stepped back and gave the middle space to Countess Yong, who was standing on one side. Countess Yong was stunned. She hurriedly said, "Madame Dowager, we don't want to break off the engagement." What should we do now? Please tell us, Madame Dowager." Madame D gritted her teeth and wanted to speak. Qin Huayong glared at her, so she had to shut up and stared at Countess Yong fiercely. She hated Countess Yong so much now. It would be a scandal even if Yuru got married again. However, Qin Yuru could not find anyone else suitable for the time being other than Di Yan. "Countess Yong, your words are ridiculous. This person is your niece. She had an affair with the heir, and now they eloped. Why did she deliberately come to our mansion to make trouble? Since Countess Yong is not satisfied with my granddaughter, you can break off the engagement. You don't have to deliberately make it seem as if our mansion doesn't allow your mansion to marry. No, we won't break off the engagement. Take this woman away." Countess Yong Yang's Huaying's off. Countess Qian's marriage, and said, "She." Qin Huayong was now a rising noble. It was much better for Duke Yong to marry Qin Huayong than for Ning Caishian in front of him. Not to mention that Ning Caishian's reputation had been ruined. The so-called elopement of the two made people think it was a joke. Break off the engagement, Qin Huayong said with a cold face on the side. He raised his eyes and looked at Ning Caishian's pale face, which had fainted, with some sarcasm on his cold and hard face. Send this woman, who framed others' reputation, to the officials. My daughter is not so easy to be plotted against. Then, it doesn't matter how the people of Duke Yong's mansion save her, and it has nothing to do with our mansion. Qin Huayong hadn't said much until now. In fact, he was hesitating, so he let Madame Dowager make the decision. Now that Madame Dowager was tough, he didn't hesitate anymore. When Qin Wanru saw Ning Caishian, who had fainted on the ground, she moved imperceptibly, and a trace of coldness appeared at the corner of her mouth. Sure enough, she is pretending. She is very good at pretending. She should never have thought that father would deal with this kind of thing so decisively, right? Grandma's attitude influenced her father's attitude. Father! Qin Yuru screamed. Shut up! Qin Huayong interrupted Qin Yuru's words with a stern voice. He not only scolded Qin Yuru into silence, but also scared the onlookers to shut up. Yuru, you obeyed your mother and wanted to marry your cousin. I didn't oppose it at first, but look, the woman your cousin got involved with not only found a man to frame you and ruin your reputation, but also instigated your cousin to run away after the matter was exposed. Now she is caught, she came to our mansion and cried pitifully. Guards, take her away and send her to the yamen. Qin Huayong said with a gloomy face. His words stirred up thousands of waves. Before, a man kept asking to marry Qin Yuru at the gate of Qin's mansion, which seemed to be happening in front of them. Was it really this woman who secretly adjusted it? If so, this woman was really terrible. Not to mention marrying her, even letting her enter the mansion, she would cause discord in the mansion. Who dared to marry such a woman? Two guards came over, pushed away the crying servant girl, and were about to pull Ning Caishian. Qin Huayong's tough means were beyond many people's imagination. Not only Countess Yong was stunned, but even Duke Yong did not react. The only one who reacted quickly was Di Yan. He rushed over, supported Ning Caishian, and implored Qin Huayong loudly, Uncle-in-law, please spare her. She is really wronged. She is so kind, how could she do such a thing? It was the steward of the mansion who had bad intentions, and that's why such a thing happened. She is really wronged. What's the use of telling me this? Go and tell the yamen. Qin Huayong glanced at Di Yan coldly and said sharply. Di Yan was stunned for a moment. He did not expect that his uncle, who was usually kind, would say such words. He seemed to be stunned at once. A guard came over and pushed him away. He held Ning Caishian in his arms and pleaded loudly to his parents, Father, Mother, please save my cousin. She really has not done anything bad. She really doesn't know anything. Cousin Yu has an ambiguous relationship with others. That hairpin is really in Cousin Yu's hands, Pa. A heavy slap shocked everyone present. Countess Yong was the first to react. She was so distressed that her whole body was trembling. She glared at Qin Huayong angrily and said, What do you mean? Why did you slap my son? Even if he doesn't want to marry your daughter, so what? Can't he just refuse to marry her? Qin Yuru doesn't have a good reputation. Could it be fake? Countess Yong's words were also a direct reaction. But when she finished speaking, she saw Madame D rush over with a livid face and slap Ning Caishian, who was still pretending to faint. Ning Caishian rolled her eyes and almost fainted this time. Take her away. What happened in front of her happened so fast that Madame Dowager could not stop it. Madame Dowager was so angry that her face turned pale. Her body softened and she fainted. For a moment, the people at the door were in a flurry again. Even Qin Huayong was anxious to deal with Madame Dowager first. No one had expected that things would be so out of control. Madame Dowager's fainting immediately made Countess Yong and Duke Yong embarrassed. They were at the door of Qin's mansion. They were the juniors of old Madame Qin, but Di Yan and an ambiguous woman made old Madame Qin faint. If this was spread, even Duke Yong would be censured by the imperial censor. Qin Wanru's eyes still fell on Ning Kaixian. At this time, Ning Kaixian opened her eyes sadly with tears falling down. She reached out to push Di Yan away, looking disheartened and desperate to the extreme. She staggered and turned to walk out. The people at the door of the mansion could not help but make a way for her. At this moment, everyone at the door focused their attention on Madame Dowager. Countess Yong saw this scene, but her eyes flickered and she pretended not to see it. Di Yan wanted to reach out to help her up, but he was stopped by an old maid beside Countess Yong. He did not dare to shout anymore, but just looked sadly at Ning Caishian swaying back. Nanny Duan suddenly whispered to Qin Huayong. Qin Huayong looked back and saw Ning Kaixian walking out. He said sternly, "Guards, send her to the government." 2 guards hurriedly ran over and grabbed Ning Kaixian. Ning Kaixian did not expect that Qin Huayong still did not intend to let her go. Biting her lip, she panicked and immediately turned her sad and desperate expression to Di Yan. Tears fell down, and she begged Di Yan silently. Seeing what she did, Di Yan felt his heart was about to twist into a knot. He suddenly pushed the old maid away. He pushed away the old maid's hand and was about to throw himself at her. "Catch the air," Qin Huayong said sternly again. 2 guards went to the door of the mansion and grabbed Di Yan on each side, immediately making him unable to move. "Cousin, I will not break up with you even if I die." Ning Kaixian felt bad and cried loudly while being dragged away. No one had expected that Qin Huayong would be so resolute in this matter. Seeing several guards arrest Ning Kaixian so fiercely, the people at the door of the mansion were all stunned. Shouldn't the madam or the old madam handle such matters in the inner courtyard? Why did it have to be sent to the yamen? Could it be that this woman had really done something so outrageous that the yamen could directly intervene in it? Because of Qin Huayong's decisive action, many people who had sympathized with Ning Kaixian began to doubt her. After all, Qin Huayong sent her to the government instead of dealing with her in private. Since it was the government, the next public trial would naturally make it clear who was in the right and who was in the wrong. If it was really a matter of a woman eloping with the heir of Duke Yong, how could it be reported to the government? "You guys, what you do next has nothing to do with our mansion. We will send the betrothal gifts back as soon as possible. Please." After taking Ning Kaixian away, Qin Huayong's cold eyes fell on Duke Yong and his wife. After saying that, without waiting for them to say anything, he turned around and helped Madame Dowager, who had finally woken up, into the door with Madame D and her daughter. With a bang, the door was closed. Duke Yong and his companions were shut out of the door, and the people at the door looked at each other in dismay. "Duke, how dare they do this?" Madame Duke Yong was so angry that her whole body trembled. She pointed at the closed door and said sternly. Chapter 228. "Father, don't hit my mother. I didn't do anything wrong, neither did she." Di Yan was stunned and said anxiously. As Qin Huayong left, the 2 guards had let go of Di Yan's hand. Seeing his mother being slapped, Di Yan was stunned and hurriedly ran over. Pa! Another slap. This time, it fell on Di Yan's face. Duke Yong's face was gloomy. He walked over and kicked Di Yan hard. Di Yan was kicked so hard that he couldn't stand. With a plop sound, he knelt down on the ground and knocked his feet on the bluestone in front of him. He screamed in pain and couldn't stand up anymore. "Duke, what are you doing?" Countess Yong came to her senses at this moment and ignored the slap mark on her face. She rushed over to protect Di Yan and didn't let Duke Yong hit him again. "Just let him kneel until my brother-in-law forgives him," Duke Yong said fiercely. "Duke, how can you be so cruel? Yan is your son." Countess Yong screamed in distress. Her eyes turned red when she saw Di Yan couldn't get up because of the pain. "My son. He doesn't look like a responsible man at all." He is blinded by that woman and can't see her vicious intention. Even now, he still doesn't understand. That woman, all the evidence, and the testimony of the man she asked to hurt Yuru have been prepared and are all in the government office. Do you still want to save her? For this woman, will your son not be an official in the imperial court and be a hooligan forever? Duke Yong said angrily, exasperated that Qin Huayong didn't live up to his expectations. The evidence was conclusive and the facts were there. This was also one of the reasons why Qin Huayong was so tough. No matter what Ning Kaisian wanted, it was useless in front of the facts. In other words, Ning Caishian's self-righteous tricks, pretending to be pitiful, gaining sympathy, and creating public opinion were useless in front of the resolute Qin Huayong. This was also one of the important reasons why Ning Kaisian was dragged away. The current situation was described by the saying, force breaks all tricks. Qin Wanru sneered and continued to observe Di Yan's reaction. At this time, he seemed to be dumbfounded. Not only was he beaten by his uncle-in-law, but he was also kicked by his own father to kneel on the ground. Listening to the buzzing voices of the people around him, he suddenly felt painful and ashamed, and could not help but hate Ning Kaisian in his heart. Di Yan's so-called deep affection was nothing more than excessive affection. At this time, the pain woke him up. Thinking that he had almost made a mistake because of a woman, he did not struggle anymore. Originally, he just went to see Ning Kaisian and remind her to run quickly. Unexpectedly, Ning Kaisian complained to him that she didn't know anything. Later, he found the supervisor, who also admitted that he was the one who schemed against the first miss of the Qin's mansion. It was because the first miss of the Qin's mansion bullied his miss that day that he was so angry. After that, Ning Kaisian told him some stories about their past together, saying that since she could not marry Di Yan, she would rather die and that she would only love Di Yan in this life. After that, Di Yan's brain was broken. Then, out of nowhere, he agreed to run away with her. The manservant tried to persuade him along the way, but he even chased him away. But he did not expect that he would be caught back before he reached the city gate. Countess Yong was also shocked by Duke Yong's words, and her face turned pale for a moment. After all, her niece was a little far away, and she was certainly not willing to accompany her son in his future. Moreover, she also hated Ning Kaisian for daring to abduct her son like this. Kneel by yourself and beg your uncle-in-law to forgive you. The marriage between the two mansions can't be cancelled simply because you were abducted by a woman. This is a matter decided by the elders of the two mansions together. After Duke Yong left, he turned around coldly and actually left Di Yan here. Countess Yong looked at Duke Yong, who was walking out, and then at her son, feeling very distressed. Mother, you go back first. I will beg my uncle-in-law and cousin to forgive me. Di Yan was ashamed and blushed. He was also shocked by the meaning of Duke Yong's mansion. At his age, he could become an official. If such a thing really happened at this time and he was censured by the imperial censor, he might really have no hope in this life. Previously, he wholeheartedly wanted to protect Ning Kaisian and only thought that she was the kindest and most gentle girl. Now, he found that he was almost completely ruined, and he immediately broke out in a cold sweat. Before, he had been preparing for his official career, and Duke Yong also asked a special teacher to teach him some things about officialdom. He did not think of it before, but now when he thought of it, he did not have any romantic thoughts in his heart. Without this kind of thought, Di Yan also became clear-headed. He knew that only when Qin's mansion forgave him could he turn a big problem into a small one and cover up his scandal. Alas, okay. Seeing that Di Yan had said so, Countess Yong felt distressed and helpless. After leaving the servant to take care of him, she could only cover her face and leave. How to deal with this matter now had to go back to the mansion to discuss it. With so many people at the gate of Qin's mansion, they could not say anything. As for Ning Kaisian, who used to be well-behaved and obedient in Countess Yong's mind, Countess Yong also secretly hated her and did not want to save her. Like Di Yan, Countess Yong also hated Ning Kaisian at this time and felt that everything in front of her was caused by her. However, she did not think that she had been hinting that Ning Kaisian could marry into Duke Yong's mansion and had been letting Di Yan and Ning Kaisian be ambiguous. She even knew that the relationship between them had long been unclear. Qin Wanru did not leave until she saw Countess Yong and Duke Yong leave. She first went to Madame Dowager's Xining Pavilion and felt Madame Dowager's pulse in person. Feeling Madame Dowager's steady pulse, she breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, Grandma listened to her and pretended to faint like Ning Kaisian. Otherwise, something bad would really happen. Grandma was in poor health and could not stand Ning Caisian's means of pretending to be crazy and weak. It would not be good if Grandma was angry at that time. It was better to be like this now. Others in the room had left. Seeing that Madame Dowager woke up and was fine, Qin Huayong left with Madame D and her daughter. Shuozhua, will your father break off the engagement with Duke Yong's mansion? Madame Dowager sat leaning against her body. Qin Wanru looked at her position and brought her a cushion to make her more comfortable. After asking, she also smiled. This child was so young and did not know this kind of thing. She was really desperate. Grandma, don't worry. Father will not break off the engagement. Qin Wanru said with a smile. Oh, why? Madame Dowager was curious and asked confusedly, it has become like this, and Child D also looks like he must protect that woman. The relationship between them is obviously not innocent. Will Madame D bear this and let that woman marry into the mansion? He will not let her marry into the mansion. That woman really has evidence in father's hands. Qin Wanru said with a smile, if father is sure to take action, that woman will not have a good end. Qin Wanru knew Qin Huayong's character very well. He had never been involved in the affairs of the backyard, but if he really intervened, he must be very stable. She felt that it was not enough to just say it, especially in front of so many people at the door. Every word and action must have evidence. Otherwise, he would not have slapped Di Yan in public and angrily rebuked Duke Yong. If there was no evidence, Qin Huayong would not be so honest with his character. This marriage is really good to break off. Madame D was also blindfolded at that time. How could she think that Di Yan would be better than Qi Tianyu? Except for his family background, Di Yan is better than Qi Tianyu in every aspect. Madame Dowager sighed and really thought that Madame D was blind. Qi Tianyu not only looked better than Di Yan, but also behaved, and learned well. How could a spoiled brat like Di Yan be compared with him? Thinking that Qin Wanru was almost ruined because of this marriage, Madame Dowager hated this marriage more and more. If she had known this would happen, she would have married Qin Yuru and Qi Tianyu earlier. In this way, there would not have been so many things that happened later. Qin Wanru patted Madame Dowager's back to soothe her and said with a smile, Grandma, don't worry about this kind of thing. Let father handle it. It's better for you to take care of yourself. Otherwise, if something happens, you will not only be in trouble, but also hurt your health. Madame Dowager was silent for a while. Of course, she understood what Qin Wanru meant. Because she understood, she smiled bitterly for a moment. After all, she was not the biological mother, and Qin Yuru was not her real child. Some things were a generation away from her, and she could not interfere too much. Not to mention that she was disliked, she would end up in a good situation. This was also the most important reason why she listened to Qin Wanru and fainted decisively after saying those words. Although her identity sounded the most honorable in the mansion, others had to respect her from the bottom of their hearts. Reaching out to pat Qin Wanru's hand, Madame Dowager nodded and said, Shuozhua, don't worry. I won't interfere in your big sister's affairs. I still have you and Rulan to take care of, and I won't die just because I am sick. Her words of laughter made Qin Wanru's eyes turn red. In her previous life, her grandmother passed away because she was sick. Grandma, Shuozhua, don't talk nonsense. I want to live a long life and protect you all the time. Qin Wanru lowered her head and buried her little face in Madame Dowager's palm. She said with slightly red eyes. This life was different from the last one. She would never let go of her grandmother's early death at the root. Coming out of Madame Dowager's yard, Qin Wanru thought for a while and turned to Qin Huayong's study instead of her own Jifang pavilion. Just at the door of the study, she saw Qin Yuru kneeling under the tree at the entrance of the yard, crying her heart out. After standing for a while, her eyes turned a little darker, and she kept walking to the door of the study. Chapter 229. In the study, Madame D knelt in front of Qin Huayong's desk and sobbed. Hearing the sound, she looked up at Qin Wanru and wiped her tears with a handkerchief again, ignoring Qin Wanru. There was no one else in the study, and Yujie did not follow them in. Qin Wanru stepped forward and bowed to Qin Huayong respectfully. Qin Huayong waved his hand to indicate that she did not need to bow, and then lowered his head to continue to read the files in his hands. There was only the sound of Madame D's low sobs in the room. It was so quiet that it made people feel weird. Qin Wanru stepped aside and hesitated, as if she had something to say. "Wanru, what's the matter?" Qin Huayong took the files and looked at them. When he did not hear Qin Wanru's voice for a long time, he raised his head again and asked Qin Wanru. "Grandma is not in good health." Qin Wanru said. "Didn't she wake up just now?" Qin Huayong frowned. "Yes, she woke up, but she was so angry. She was not in good health, and today she made such a thing. I'm afraid she can't get up for a while," Qin Wanru said softly. "Then let your grandmother rest more." Qin Huayong nodded. Qin Huayong nodded. "Father, can you let Grandma stay in Huaguang Temple for a few days to have some peace? I'm afraid the mansion will not be peaceful these days." Qin Wanru looked at Qin Huayong and hesitated. Qin Huayong was silent for a while. This matter was not over yet. Of course, he knew that Duke Yong's mansion would definitely send more people. At that time, it would be unknown what would happen. It was certain that the mansion would not be peaceful recently. Your grandma, and Rulan go to Huaguang Temple for a few days." After thinking about it for a while, Qin Huayong made up his mind. Not only Madame Dowager but also Shui Rulan had little to do with this matter. But if they stayed in the mansion, they would be annoyed and unable to rest even if they wanted to. "How about things in the mansion if my mother leaves?" Qin Wanru said calmly. The purpose of her coming was to take her grandma and mother away, and she did not want to be involved in the matter of Qin Yuru and Di Yen. Let a few stewards and aunts take care of it first. Previously when Rulan's health was not good, they were also the ones who took care of it first. Qin Huayong thought about it and felt that there might be time for this matter to be resolved. It was better for everyone to end this kind of battle quickly. "Yes, father." "When are we leaving?" Qin Wanru tried to sound as relaxed as possible. Qin Huayong thought for a moment and said, "Just for a while. Go and help your grandmother and mother pack up. Let's go to Huaguang Temple now." "Yes, father." Since she had achieved her goal, Qin Wanru bowed deeply to Qin Huayong and did not say anything more. She turned around and walked out. She heard Madame D's voice. "General, why did you let them leave at this time? Is it not good to let others see our mansion? Only you know whether you like me or not. At this time, do you still want to marry into Duke Yong's mansion?" Qin Huayong's voice was as cold as ever. "What can I do if I don't? Yuru's reputation." Madame D cried again. Her voice became softer and Qin Wanru couldn't hear her clearly as she walked away. Outside the yard, Qin Yuru was still crying. When Qin Wanru walked by, she did not look up, as if she did not notice Qin Wanru coming. Mei Shui, who was kneeling with her, glanced at Qin Wanru timidly and hurriedly bowed her head to salute. Qin Wanru walked slowly in front of her. When she walked past her, she could feel Qin Yuru's cold and solid eyes behind her. "Second miss, why does first miss hate you so much? This has nothing to do with you. You didn't ask Miss Ning to make trouble." Yujia looked back at Qin Yuru's action and asked in confusion. Some people are born to think that others should be trampled under their feet. Qin Wanru smiled slightly and said meaningfully. For a selfish and conceited person like Qin Yuru, sometimes she really did not need too many reasons to hate others. Or a reason that seemed impossible and ridiculous in others' eyes could be a great reason to hurt herself secretly in her eyes. In this regard, she and Madame D were the same. Fortunately, in this life, Qin Yuru could no longer destroy herself as she did in the previous life. Only she and Madame D would be destroyed slowly. Although Di Yan did not make progress, for the sake of his title of nobility, there were many people who wanted to help him. Although Ning Kaixian failed, there were others. From Ning Caishian's matter, some people would learn more lessons. Beating the grass to scare the snake, sometimes it was a good thing to scare the poisonous snake out early. Because they would only stay for a few days, Madame Dowager and Shui Rulan did not pack many things, and Qin Wanru herself had even less. After a little packing, several large carriages went out of Ningyuan Army General's mansion and went to Huaguang Temple. Qin Huayong sent a supervisor to Huaguang Temple to book an incense room. When they arrived at Huaguang Temple, the incense room had already been prepared. Madame Dowager and Shui Rulan naturally could not bear the burden of Wenqin Road. Fortunately, they could drive the carriages directly up from the side door of another slope. It was mainly a convenient passage for some sick and weak people to go to Huaguang Temple. Most people who could walk by themselves would take this Wenqin Road. It was said that only those who took the Wenqin Road could be heard by Buddha and be more sincere. Qin Wanru still took Yujia up the mountain this time, and she also took Chu Lu to help deal with chores. Compared with Qing Shui, although Chu Lu was a second-class servant girl, she seemed to be more valued in Jifang Pavilion. What happened before also made Qin Wanru gradually trust Chu Lu. As for Qing Shui, Qin Wanru thought it was better to transfer her to another place after a period of time. Even though Qing Shui had to stand on her side now, it was really hard to say whether Qing Shui would be forced to do what Madame D would do next. With such a person around, Madame D would definitely not be reconciled. But in the end, Nanny Yu advised Qin Wanru to give Qing Shui more time, saying that she felt Qing Shui was also pitiful, and she could do nothing as a servant. Qin Wanru thought for a while and temporarily put this matter aside, still letting her stay in Jifang Pavilion. In the next few days, it was very quiet, but there was news from Nanny Yu every day. It was said that not long after Qin Wanru and Madame Dowager left, old Madame of Duke Yong personally came to Ningyuan Army General's mansion. She originally wanted to see old Madame Qin, but because Madame Dowager was not there, she directly went to see Qin Huayong. No one knew what they talked in the study. Later, Qin Huayong went out of the mansion and called Di Yan in at the door, and then specially invited a doctor to treat Di Yan's injury. Duke Yong's kick actually injured Di Yan's leg, and he had been recuperating in Qin's mansion. As for the matter of Ning Kaixian, it was even more straightforward. The Yamen directly held a public trial. The evidence was conclusive, and everything proved that Ning Kaixian had bad intentions and did indeed harm Qin Yuru's reputation. Qin Yuru and Di Yan did not show up. Qin's mansion sent a steward, and Duke Yong's mansion sent some evidence of Di Yan, all of which were letters written by Ning Kaixian to Di Yan in the past. It was said that those letters were extremely shameless, and were not written by a miss from an aristocratic family. Ning's mansion was also an aristocratic family. Although it was a declining aristocratic family, as the Ning family, it did not completely decline. However, because of this matter, all the women of the Ning family were implicated. People in the capital city said that the women of the Ning family were very cheap, and the words they spoke to men were even more unbearable than those of the women in the brothel. These things were all passed to Qin Wanru's ears bit by bit. Although she was not in Qin's mansion, she had been paying attention to this matter. It sounded simple, but Qin Wanru could still deeply understand the meaning behind it. Fortunately, her grandmother and mother had been brought out early, otherwise, there would be a lot of entanglement. Neither her grandmother nor her mother could make a decision on this matter. It was reasonable for her father to take all these matters on his own. At least in this way, the matter would not be shifted to her grandmother and mother. Sometimes, the aftermath could also kill people. It was better to stay out of it and not be too close to it when it was a dog-eat-dog fight. In the dark cell, a woman with disheveled hair and a dirty face sat in the corner. She was dressed in thin white clothes, and there was no color on her face. Only her eyes were red, and she looked cold and miserable. A sound came from the closed door of the cell. The female jailer shook the key in her hand and came down with two people. She unlocked the key on the door and said loudly, "Ning Kaisian, someone is here to see you." Raising her dull eyes, Ning Kaisian rolled her eyes and shouted excitedly, "Cousin." "It's not a cousin. It's your younger sister who has been framed." Ning Xueqing walked in, looked down at Ning Kaisian, and said disdainfully, "At this time, my cousin is accompanied by a beauty. Who will remember who you are? You are just a woman he has thrown away." The servant girl behind her handed a pouch to the female jailer. The female jailer sneered at Ning Kaisian and said, "Hurry up. This is not your mansion, where you can talk casually." What Ning Kaisian did really made all women feel disgusted. The female jailer had not liked Ning Kaisian for a long time. She pretended to be delicate and seemed to be easily blown down by the wind. However, nothing happened to her after entering the cell. It was said that she was a beauty who could be blown down by the wind. She was just putting on an act. The female jailer had seen many women like her. "Yes, yes, yes, we will be quick," the servant girl said with a flattering smile. The female jailer snorted coldly and turned to leave. The servant girl stepped aside, lowered her head, and lowered her eyes. She did not move at all, as if she did not exist. "Ning Xueqing, is that you?" Seeing that the person in front of her was Ning Xueqing, who had always been at odds with her, the expectation on Ning Caishian's face faded, and she lowered her head. "Ning Kaisian, you can't be real, can you?" Ning Xueqing squatted down, tilted her head to look at Ning Caishian's face, and sneered. "Di Yan has always treated you as a plaything. Don't you know that? The letters you wrote have been known by the whole capital, and I heard that they have become the model for the brothels in the capital." "Shut up." Ning Kaisian raised her slightly bloody eyes, looked at Ning Xueqing gloomily, and said, "What's the use of getting angry at me? If you have the ability, go and find Di Yan and Qin Yuru. Look at you now. Not only me, but also the clansmen of the Ning family want you to be a pig. Ning Kaisian, you are so pitiful." Ning Xueqing trampled on Ning Kaisian mercilessly and said. Chapter 230. "So what if I take you away? What else do you want to do? With your current appearance, even if you become a concubine, Duke Yong's mansion will not want you. You have always thought that you can control Di Yan. Now I think it is a joke." Ning Xueqing sneered coldly. "Take me away, and I will help you marry Wang Xingxue. Otherwise, you won't think that he will marry you." Ning Kaisian said with a cold look. "Why won't he marry me?" "He will definitely marry me, but it is still a little early. It is more suitable after a while." Unwilling to show weakness in front of Ning Kaisian, Ning Xueqing raised her head proudly. "Do you believe this reason?" Ning Kaisian said darkly. Ning Xueqing opened her mouth and wanted to refute. "Take me away, and I will help you. I will die for you." Ning Kaisian interrupted her coldly again. She raised her head, and her eyes were a little bloody, which made people panic. Ning Kaisian knew clearly that she was ruined. Originally, she thought that if Di Yan insisted, she could definitely marry into Duke Yong's mansion. Anyway, she had given up the idea of being the legal wife and was just a concubine. What could Ning Yuan army general's mansion say? Would Qin Yuru ignore her reputation and dare to reject her before marrying into Duke Yong's mansion? Because she took Di Yan to run all the way, everyone knew about the matter between her and Di Yan. Moreover, she showed weakness and knelt at the gate of Ning Yuan army general's mansion. In this case, anyone would have to accept her. Even if they wanted to pretend to be generous, they would certainly show it in a dignified manner. As long as she married into Duke Yong's mansion, it was hard to say who would be the winner in the end with her own means. However, she did not expect that the unexpected plot was that the Madam of Ningyuan Army General's mansion got the news and wanted to deal with the second miss of Qin's mansion. Later, because Qin Yuru ruined her reputation, and seeing that Qin Wanjin was not outstanding and could not be an obstacle to her, the madam shifted the matter to Qin Yuru. This matter had actually been exposed, but so what? As long as he insisted, and the steward himself admitted that this matter had nothing to do with him, then it would be impossible for him to have anything to do with it. She was clear about Ning Caishian's means. With these means, it was not difficult to ask for a chance to enter Duke Yong's mansion. What she didn't expect the most was that Ningyuan Army General Qin Huayong would intervene without hesitation. However, it was Di Yan who gave her the final blow. He took out all the letters she had written to him in the past and used them as evidence in court. Ning Caishian, who had grown up in the Ning mansion, knew some of the twists and turns in the officialdom. In her opinion, some of the behaviors of the civil officials were not much different from the tricks in the backyard. However, she didn't know about the military officers, who would always hit the target with one strike. This made her misjudge Qin Huayong's character and overestimate Di Yan's so-called deep love. Ning Caishian left the cell because she was too sick to be cured. Ning Caishian was a daughter of the Ning mansion, and she didn't kill anyone. Originally, she didn't deserve to be sentenced to death. However, her reputation was as important as the sky. Many families couldn't bear the stain, so they asked this woman to commit suicide for the sake of other daughters of the Ning family. The news of Ning Caishian's death came out a few days after she left the prison. For a while, there were all kinds of rumors. Although everyone said that she died of illness, they privately guessed that the Ning family forced her to commit suicide for the sake of their daughter's reputation. Anyway, the news of Ning Caishian's death and the farce between her and Di Yan were known by the whole capital city. However, a person's death was like a lamp going out, and some people said that she was pitiful. Speaking of which, it was Di Yan who abandoned her, which made Ning Caishian fall into such a situation. Also because of her death, many people in Ning's mansion who were not in a good mood slowly changed. A dead woman was really nothing compared to another person who was still enjoying the glory and wealth. Some things were like this. When a person died, there was nothing to say. Many people showed a kind of tolerance for the dead. The gate of Ning's mansion was also closed tightly. At first, there were a few people watching the fun, but later they found there was nothing to see, so they all left. Ning Caishian's funeral was also hastily finished. No one noticed that on the night of Ning Caishian's funeral, a small sedan left from the back door of Ning's mansion, followed by only an old maid and a servant girl. Then they disappeared into the vast night. No one thought that the person who was dead in everyone's eyes would appear again in the future and step into the capital city, the land of disaster. When Qin Wanru got the news of Ning Caishian's death, she was on Wenxin Road in Huaguang Temple. When she came to Huaguang Temple before, because she accompanied Madame Dowager and Shui Ruolin, she did not walk on this Wenxin Road. After a little adjustment, she took Yujie and Qin Wanru to walk on that Wenxin Road again. Wiping the sweat on her forehead, she looked up and saw layers of winding steps. She took a deep breath and asked, "Is she dead?" "Yes," she said so, "but I don't know if it is true." Yujie replied, "When I came here just now, I saw Nanny Duan, and she said so." "What do you think?" Qin Wanru smiled slightly and walked up a few steps. "I think it is possible. Although Miss Ning doesn't seem to be a person who will commit suicide, her health is really not very good. After such a big blow, it is possible that she can't recover from illness." Yujie thought for a while and said, "You also think she is not in good health?" Qin Wanru said. Yujie caught up with Qin Wanru neatly and said, "I always feel that she looks very bad, so I think she is not in good health. But you said before that, her health is not so serious." "In fact, I don't understand." Yujie caught up with Qin Wanru and said. Qin Wanru pursed her lips. Yujie had the medical skills, but she still didn't understand some of the ways of the world. Ning Kaixian was not in good health, but she was not weak. She knelt at the gate of the mansion for so long, but nothing happened to her. Later, when she was pulled away, she could even roar emotionally. It could be seen that she was not very sick or weak. At first, she might have pretended to win others' pity, but after she got used to it, she even repeatedly hinted to herself that she was sick and weak and could not go through anything. This kind of hint even deceived herself, so that Ning Kaixian always had a weak appearance. It seemed to be true. Qin Wanru's smile widened a little and she said with certainty, Ning Kaixian will not die. Why? Yujie asked in confusion. How could a person like her really die like this? A trace of darkness flashed at the bottom of Qin Wanru's eyes, and the corners of her mouth were slightly raised. The Ning sisters all had their means, but the Ning's mansion behind them was really inconspicuous, so that they could not marry well. But with her identity as the daughter of an aristocratic family, it showed that Ning Kaixian was not simple to be risked to be a concubine. Such a woman, who was not simple, would not die so easily. Yujie said doubtfully, should we tell the general and ask him to send someone to investigate it? No, it has nothing to do with us. Qin Wanru shook her head. This was a muddle between Di Yan and Ning Kaixian, and she did not want to get involved at all. So what if Ning Kaixian was dead? So what if she was alive? It had nothing to do with her. The reason why she left the Qin's mansion early with her grandmother and mother was that she wanted to get away from this matter. On the one hand, she did not want her grandmother and mother to be disturbed, and on the other hand, she had such an idea. Since Qin Wanru said so, Yujie thought it made sense. The first Miss Ning was not a good person. She had schemed against her own miss, and she schemed with Madame D. Thinking of this, Yujie felt very happy. At least now, even if Madame D and Ning Kaixian bitten each other, they were not good people. No matter who won or lost, it had nothing to do with them. Looking up at the steps above, Yujie no longer mentioned Ning Kaixian. Miss, do you want to take a rest? It's still so far, and you can't go up in one breath. Go up a little more. It's still too close. Qin Wanru shook her head and also looked up. It was less than half of the way. If she took a rest now, she might have to rest again later. Miss, your health is not very good. It's enough for you to walk such a distance. If you really walk such a distance at once, I don't mind, but I'm afraid that you will be tired and can't recover at that time. Yujie advised. She was really worried about Qin Wanru's health. An aristocratic miss did not go out of the house and did not take a step. How could she have so much energy to walk such a long distance? I'll take a rest after walking a little more. Qin Wanru said. Yujie nodded helplessly, followed Qin Wanru's side, and carefully guarded her. They walked all the way and did not notice that they had already become the scenery in others' eyes. Qin Wanru's face was red, and her white and tender skin was almost rosy. Her hair was tied up in a bun, and there were only 2 butterfly hairpins in her hair, which looked simple and beautiful. Her clear eyes seemed to be soaked in water, and her beautiful eyes were full of words when they moved. Her cherry lips were like red paint, which made her delicate facial features more vivid. Such an outstanding girl unconsciously attracted many pilgrims on Wenxin Road while walking on the road. Every time someone walked by her, they often looked back. Seeing such a weak girl could climb so high in anger, they all praised her. She was a determined girl. Which family is she from? In a resting pavilion on the side of Wenxin Road, a luxurious old lady looked at Qin Wanru. After looking at her carefully for a few times, she asked the old maid standing to serve her. Old madam, please wait a moment. I'll go to inquire about it right away. The old maid followed the old lady's eyes and looked at Qin Wanru. She could not help but secretly praise her. What a beautiful little girl. Moreover, she looked not only beautiful but also very determined. No wonder her master would look up to her. It seemed that she was not raised by an ordinary rich family. Miss, do you want to take a rest? Chapter 231. Miss, are you all right? Seeing that her question almost made trouble, the old maid hurriedly said with modesty and helped Yujie to help Qin Wanru. I'm fine. Qin Wanru composed herself and shook her head. Holding Yujie's hand, she stood still and looked at the old maid standing in front of her. The old maid was smiling and amiable. Although her clothes were very simple, her temperament was not like that of an ordinary person. Qin Wanru couldn't help but be careful. There were many dignitaries in the capital city. Who knew who the person in front of her was? Grandma, what's the matter? Qin Wanru put away the deep meaning in her eyes and asked gently. You are so young and look so weak, but you climbed up the mountain directly from there. I really feel strange, so I ask if you want to rest for a while. The old maid said with a smile. So she had watched her all the way. I can't climb anymore. Qin Wanru wiped her face with a handkerchief and said with a sincere smile, I just climbed up with one breath. After such a pause, she really felt tired and couldn't lift her feet. Seeing that Qin Wanru didn't mean to hide, the old maid's smile became more and more kind. I wonder which mansion you are from, miss? I've never seen such an interesting miss before. Our miss is the second miss of Ningyuan Army General's mansion. Yujie stuck out her small chest and said proudly, with a very proud expression. Ningyuan Army General's mansion. The old maid didn't seem to remember who it was, frowned, and said to herself. Grandma, is there anything else? Qin Wanru smiled slightly, politely changed the topic and asked. Nothing else. Don't you need to rest more? The old maid moved aside and said with a gentle smile. No, let's go a little longer. Qin Wanru smiled and shook her head. Then she walked past the old maid and went forward without looking back. Yujie followed closely behind her. The master and the servants slowly went up. Although they were not fast, they persisted and went up to the top of the mountain. The old maid standing behind them looked at Qin Wanru, who walked up a few steps, nodded, and turned to the pavilion on the side. In the pavilion, a large group of old maids and maids were waiting outside the pavilion. They were all very respectful. Although there were many people, they did not make a sound. After the old maid entered the pavilion, she reported to the luxurious Madame Dowager sitting in the middle, Madame Dowager, it is said that she is the second miss of Ningyuan Army General's mansion. Is there a Ningyuan Army General in the capital city? Forgive this old servant's poor hearing, but I really didn't know that there was such a person in the capital. Ningyuan Army General. Madame Dowager lowered her head and carefully tasted it. Suddenly, her eyes lit up. Is it the Ningyuan Army General from Jiangzhou? The one with the most rumors? Madame Dowager, do you mean the Ningyuan Army General's Qin's mansion, which has been in an uproar recently because of what happened to Duke Yong's mansion? The old maid finally remembered and asked in surprise. It should be. It is impossible for there to be two Ningyuan Army Generals in the capital city. Madame Dowager raised her head and looked at Qin Wanru's back. In such a short time, Qin Wanru's back had gone far. She is a lovely miss, but why is she from Ningyuan Army General's mansion? The matter between Ningyuan Army General's mansion and Duke Yong's mansion had been widely discussed in the noble circle in the capital city recently. There were all kinds of opinions. But no matter what, Di Yan of Duke Yong's mansion was not a good person, and it seemed that the first miss of Ningyuan Army General's mansion was not a good person either. Not only did her mother have a bad nature, but she was also suspected of killing Ningyuan Army General's second wife. In this matter, some people said that it was because the first miss of Qin General's mansion could not tolerate others, so the miss of Ning's mansion had to make such a bad decision and ended up dead. After all, the reason was that she could not tolerate others. She seems to be a polite person. She should know that I am a servant, but she still calls me grandma. The old maid had a good impression of Qin Wanru and said a good word for her calmly. Her temperament is not bad, her looks are not bad, her family background is not bad, and she is polite. However, if she is like her elder sister, not a magnanimous person and not tolerant of others, then she will also get into trouble. Ning Yuan army general is a boorish man after all. For the sake of his eldest daughter, he actually took the initiative to intervene in the affairs of the backyard. Madame Dowager shook her head disapprovingly. Yes, Madame Dowager is right. The old maid did not dare to say anything more and only responded with a smile. Let's go. After resting for so long, these old bones can't even be compared with a weak little girl. Madame Dowager stood up, moved her body, and said with a smile. When Madame Dowager was young, you were also very healthy. At that time, you also came to walk this Wenqin road. I remember that at that time, I accompanied you to walk more than half of the road in one breath. The old maid said with a smile as she asked someone to clean up the tea set on the table. What time is that? It has been so long, and you still remember it. Madame Dowager sighed with a smile and said helplessly. In this servant's eyes, old Madame is always healthy. The old maid flattered Madame Dowager with a glib tongue. Madame Dowager smiled and squinted her eyes. What are you talking about? If you are really healthy, why do you need to take medicine every day? This time, thanks to the fragrance of July that Chen brought, it is really a rare good medicine. As Madame Dowager spoke, she stepped on the steps of the mountain road and walked up slowly. She walked very slowly and mainly looked at the scenery while walking. After a few steps, she rested in the pavilion on the side. After that, the conversation with the old maid did not mention Qin Wanru again. It was originally just a chance encounter. She just listened to her grandson's suggestion and specially went up the mountain to exercise her body and walk a few more steps. Could it be possible that she really found a very suitable miss from an aristocratic family? There were so many misses from aristocratic families in the capital city, and there were many to choose from. At that time, she would hold a banquet and invite the misses to choose well. This time, she could not make Chen unhappy like last time. At this time, Qin Wanru had walked more than half of the road. She really could not stand it anymore, so she sat on a stone by the roadside and rested. She was gasping and could not even speak at this time. The hair on her forehead had been soaked with sweat. She walked a little too fast for this section of the road, so fast that even Yujie followed her to gasp. Finally, Yujie breathed a little better. She looked back in surprise and asked, Miss, is there someone chasing you? You walk so fast that even I can't keep up with you. Yujie felt that she increasingly admired Mississippi Miss was much thinner than her, but even she was amazed that she could climb so fast. The old maid just now should not be an ordinary person. She seems to be a servant of some influential family in the capital city. Such a person would not ask me if I want to rest for no reason, right? Qin Wanru was still not out of breath. The old maid was polite and even a little elegant, which made her very vigilant. She was definitely not an old maid from an ordinary family. Her own troubles had never stopped, and she did not want to get into trouble again. This kind of influential family often had more troubles. Qin Wanru felt that she had better stay far away from them. This was also the reason why she climbed up without looking back despite the heavy gasping just now. Intuitively, it was better to stay away from this kind of person. Miss, is there someone behind that person? Yujie said while she wanted to turn around to check, but was stopped by Qin Wanru. She gasped and said, Don't look back. Look, let's take a break. They won't climb up so fast. Even Qin Wanru had to admire herself for climbing so high in one breath. I have to admire myself. Not everyone can climb so high in one go. Looking up, although the mountain road was rugged, she could still see clearly that there were far fewer people on the top than below. After resting for a while, Qin Wanru gathered her strength to climb up again. This time, she was more tired. It seemed that her body and mind had reached the extreme, and she wanted to relax. Compared with the previous one, the strength of her feet was much weaker. Although it was shorter than the previous one, it also took less time. Finally climbing up the mountain, Qin Wanru did not have the strength to go to other places. She returned to the fragrant room first, took a bath and changed clothes, and sat in front of the window to rest. Yujie combed her hair that had just been washed. Her black hair fell down, making her more beautiful than flowers. There was wind blowing from the window, and the color of her hair was stronger than the color of flowers. What did Grandma say? Qin Wanru sat in front of the window and casually asked the old maid who just came back. Old Grandma said that it depends on Second Mississippi. If Second Miss wants to stay on the mountain for a few more days, you can stay for a few more days. The old maid replied. Previously, the supervisor of Qin's mansion went up the mountain under the order of Qin Huayong. He asked old Grandma to go down the mountain and said that everything was fine now. What does Mother think? Qin Wanru thought for a while and asked. Madame Shui also said that it depends on you. You have been detained in the mansion recently and have not come out. She is afraid that you are in a bad mood because of the detention. The old maid replied with a smile. Both old Grandma and Madame Shui thought highly of their master. Of course, the servant was very happy and felt proud when she went out. Qin Wanru was silent for a moment. In fact, it was okay to go back at this time, but tomorrow was the beginning of the month. It was a rare opportunity, so she had to warn him again. He might not believe it now, but with Wen Shiqi's intelligence, he should think of this matter. It was actually not good for a girl in boudoir to have contact with others all the time. Taking this opportunity, it could be regarded as ending the predestined relationship. It was to repay the kindness of the last life and the kindness of half a teacher. Tell Grandma and Mother that I want to stay for one more day. I haven't gone to the bamboo forest behind Huaguang Temple yet. I heard that it is the purple bamboo forest, but I have never seen the purple bamboo forest. I heard that there are some inscriptions left by the ancient sages there. I really want to go and have a look. Qin Wanru said very naturally. She had never been to the purple bamboo forest and the forest of ancestral tablets, which was also the excuse she left at the beginning. Yes, I will go and tell them now. The old maid was not surprised by Qin Wanru's words. She answered with a smile and said. Chapter 232. Second Miss is here. What's the matter? The old maid tried hard to stand firm and said in shock. Old Grandma asked Second Miss to go there immediately. First Miss Qi fainted. The servant girl gasped and wiped her sweat. The old maid did not dare to delay and hurriedly moved aside to let the servant girl enter the door. Qi Rongji fainted. When did she come? Qin Wanru asked in surprise while asking Yujie to put up her wet hair. She did not take Qi Rongji up the mountain this time. How could she faint in Grandma's place at this time? She could be sure that she did not hear the news of Qi Rongji this morning. Grandma should not know that she went to Huaguang Temple. Just now, First Miss Qi came to Huaguang Temple and said that she had something to tell old Grandma. But she suddenly fainted before she said a few words. Old Grandma asked you to go and have a look. The servant girl ran in a hurry and was still gasping. Inexplicably ran to Grandma and then fainted. What does Qi Rongji want to do? There was a sense of deepness in her watery eyes. She did not think that Qi Rongji really went up the mountain for no reason. Who agreed that she suddenly left Ningyuan Army General's mansion? You go back first and tell Grandma that I will be there soon. After a pause, Qin Wanru slightly calmed down and ordered. Yes, Second Mississippi. Then I will report to old Grandma right away, lest old Grandma will be anxious. The servant girl nodded, retreated, and left in a hurry. Yujie stirred up Qin Wanru's beautiful long hair again and asked suspiciously, Miss, what does First Miss Qi want to do? I think she must be pretending to faint. Her words made Qin Wanru laugh and raised her charming watery eyes. Do you think so too? Yes, that's what I think. The First Miss Qi won't faint for no reason. I've seen her complexion before. She has always been healthy and not delicate. When I was in Jiangzhou, I always heard that the first Miss Chi was spoiled and rude. Sometimes, she directly beat people in front of others. Now, she looks so delicate. It's really weird. Qi Rongji was so famous in Jiangzhou that even Yujian knew about her in a place like Jingxin Monastery. Especially the things that happened between Qi Rongji and Qin Yuru, and what Qi Rongji did in Jingxin Monastery when she wanted to hurt Qin Wanru. She was well known in Jiangzhou. Since I'm here, let's go and take a look. Qin Wanru smiled slightly, glanced out of the window, and said. Since she was here, she should make the best of it. It seemed that Qi Rongji also wanted to stay in Huaguang Temple. When Qin Wanru arrived at Madame Dowager's room, Qi Rongji had already woken up and was lying in the side room of the yard. When Qin Wanru entered, Madame Dowager asked Nanny Duan to lead her directly to the side room and let her see Qi Rongji's body first. Sitting on the chair in front of the bed, Qin Wanru reached out to feel Qi Rongji's pulse. Qin Wanru glanced at Qi Rongji's face. She looked a little nervous and probably did not expect that Qin Wanru would come to feel her pulse. Right hand. After feeling her left hand, Qin Wanru put down her left hand and said coldly. Qin Wanru, do you know how to feel the pulse? What can you feel? Qi Rongji was not happy and said with a little pleading, can you help me find a doctor? I'll pay for it myself. Are you ill? Qin Wanru raised her eyes and looked at Qi Rongji clearly. Her beautiful eyes seemed to be able to see through people's hearts. I'm not ill. Looking at Qin Wanru's pulse, Qi Rongji felt a little weak at first. Qi Rongji felt a little unconfident in her movements, but then she immediately felt that Qin Wanru was just a fancy doctor. After all, when she was in Jiangzhou, she had never heard that Qin Wanru could treat patients. She just looked like a doctor. She reached out to cover her head and said smoothly, but I feel dizzy. You came up the mountain because you feel dizzy? Yujie wanted to say something but was stopped by Qin Wanru. She said lightly. I remembered that my mother made a wish in Jiangzhou to let me go to the capital city safely and asked me to find a big temple to fulfill the vow after I arrived in the capital city. So I specially reported it to Madame D. Madame D said that Madame Dowager and Madame Shui happened to be on the mountain, so she asked me to come here. But I didn't expect that I would feel tired and faint after walking for a while on Wenxin Road. Qi Rongji lowered her head and withdrew her hand. Asked Madame D. Madame D herself was in a mess now and had no energy to care about Qi Rongji. Not to mention that Qi Rongji said she would go up the mountain to fulfill the vow. Even if Qi Rongji said she would go back to Jiangzhou, she would not interfere. Ning Kaixian was dead, but the dead were the most important people. Di Yan's current reputation was that of a scumbag. Qin Yuru had also become the representative of a shrew and had a bad reputation. In addition, Di Yan and Countess Yong were not on good terms now. This was really a mess. There are no good doctors on the mountain with your current health. I'd better ask Grandma to send you down the mountain. At least there are good doctors at the foot of the mountain. Qin Wanru stood up and was about to go out to report to Madame Dowager. Qi Rongji rushed over and grabbed her hand. Qin Wanru, I don't want to go down the mountain. I have to fulfill the vow first. Even if my health is not good, I have to fulfill the vow first. Otherwise, Buddha will blame me. What if you faint again if you stay on the mountain with your current health? Qin Wanru stood still and glanced at Qi Rongji's face lightly. No, I won't faint again. There are so many pilgrims on the mountain. Why don't you help me to ask if there is someone who knows medical skills? Just help me to have a look. Qi Rongji said anxiously. Someone who knows medical skills. Qin Wanru frowned and glanced at Qi Rongji's anxious face. How can there be someone who knows medical skills on the mountain? There are so many pilgrims. How can there be no one who knows medical skills? What's more, my illness is not a serious one. If there is no one, I will endure it for a while. It should not be a big deal. Qi Rongji said with a little grievance. She was a guest in Qin's mansion and came up the mountain to find Madame Dowager. If something really happened in Huaguang Temple, she would blame Madame Dowager and Shui Rulan. Am I not a person who knows medical skills? Qin Wanru asked calmly and then sat down on the chair again. Her sharp eyes fell on Qi Rongji's face. She wanted to see what Qi Rongji wanted to do. You know medical skills. You'd better forget it. If I ask you to help me to see a doctor, I am afraid that I will really be killed by you. I don't want you to see a doctor. Go and find a doctor for me. Qi Rongji was not happy. She leaned on the bed and looked sick and weak. She reached out and touched her head again, showing a weak look. Qin Wanru, if you don't want to, I will ask Madame Dowager to help me find a doctor. Who are you looking for? Qin Wanru's long eyelashes fluttered twice and asked. Find a doctor who knows medical skills. Qi Rongji said eagerly. Only at the foot of the mountain. Qin Wanru refused decisively. Qi Rongji was anxious, and her eyes immediately widened. But I have to fulfill my vow, so I can't go down the mountain now. I can't find a doctor with good medical skills. There are so many pilgrims on the mountain. You don't want me to ask them one by one for you, do you? Qin Wanru sneered. Even if they pretended to be harmonious in the outside, in fact, they were just pretending. No one would really take it seriously. I don't know how to find one, but I think it is possible to ask the monks of Huaguang Temple, right? Qin Wanru, please, I am really afraid that something will happen to me, but I can't go down the mountain. Qi Rongji pretended to be pitiful and looked at Qin Wanru with an extremely humble attitude. Monks? Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows. Yes, monks. Of course, you have to ask the monks in the temple to know about things in Huaguang Temple. Seeing that Qin Wanru had fallen into the trap, Qi Rongji hurriedly said. Qin Wanru did not speak this time. She just stared at Qi Rongji with a sweet smile on her lips, but inexplicably made people feel cold. Qi Rongji was flustered by her gaze. She looked around and glanced around, looking very guilty. Why don't you ask the servant girls to find one? Didn't you go up the mountain with 2 servant girls? 2 servant girls, Chuanyi and Chuanxi, stood in front of the bed to serve. What do the 2 maids know? And it's not good to let the maids come forward. We have to let a master come forward to hold the fort. But I'm sick. Otherwise, I can go to the monks of Huaguang Temple and ask if there's anyone. Qi Rongji muttered and pushed the words away. What she said sounded somewhat reasonable and very slippery. Qin Wanru thought for a moment, raised her eyes slightly, and looked at Qi Rongji with her long eyelashes fluttering twice. She looked at Qi Rongji and said slowly. Qi Rongji was overjoyed and wanted to say something. But the next moment, her face stiffened. But you have to tell me, what do you want? I don't want to do anything. I really want to fulfill a vow. Qi Rongji swallowed and felt that she had nowhere to hide under the gaze of Qin Wanru's watery eyes. But she gritted her teeth casually, looked into Qin Wanru's eyes, and said angrily, Qin Wanru, what do you mean? If you don't want to help me, then you don't want to help me. Your Qin's mansion said before that you would take good care of me. Now you are even unwilling to help me find a good doctor. After saying that, she picked up a handkerchief to wipe her tears and cried. Seeing her pretending like this, Qin Wanru already had some ideas in her mind. What Qi Rongji was plotting should be related to medical skills or doctors. Qi Rongji, why don't you tell me why Qin Yuru took the initiative to hit a child in Duke Xing's mansion that day? If you don't say it, then don't expect me to help you. I will tell Grandma that you are very good, nothing happened, and you deliberately pretended to be sick. Qin Wanru said with a slight smile, stood up, and looked like she would leave without saying a word. Until now, she still didn't understand what happened in Duke Xing's mansion that day, but she felt that it was an important key. Since Qi Rongji brought the topic to her, why not seize it? What did you say? Qi Rongji was stunned for a moment. She really didn't expect that Qin Wanru would ask such a thing at this time. Forget it if you don't understand. Qin Wanru was going to leave in a huff, and Yu Jie went to the door first. Wait a minute, I will tell you. Chapter 233. Say it. Qin Wanru sat down again and said calmly. Qi Rongji rolled her eyes and said, Qin Wanru, does it have anything to do with you? Do you really think that you'll always want to be young Master Xiao's savior just because you saved him once? Don't want to say it? Qin Wanru ignored her sarcasm and just raised her eyebrows. She said in a lazy manner, and the threat in her eyes was obvious. Okay, I'll say it. Anyway, it has nothing to do with me. Qi Rongji did not want to ruin her own business because of Qin Yuru. Qin Yuru and I were walking together that day. Suddenly, an old maid came out and said that she was the servant of old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion. She asked Qin Yuru to go to the side and talk with her. Qin Yuru took her servants and the old maid to the side to talk. I wanted to listen, but I couldn't because I was a little far away. After the old maid left, Qin Yuru said that she wanted to see some scenery. She turned to another road and happened to meet the little master. Then they bumped into each other. Qi Rongji thought of the scene on that day and said. Qin Yuru bumped into him on her own initiative. Qin Wanru asked affirmatively again. Of course she bumped into him on her own initiative. Otherwise, how could she bump into such a child with the basic etiquette and behavior? Qi Rongji curled her lips and said disdainfully. Did you see that old maid later? Qin Wanru thought for a moment and asked again. No, I don't know what she said to Qin Yuru. Old Madame of Duke Xing's mansion didn't come out that day, so it was impossible for her servants to see it. Qi Rongji became impatient and rolled her eyes. Qin Wanru, why don't you go to find a doctor for me? I've told you everything. I'll ask for you now. It's not certain whether there is a doctor or not. Qin Wanru stood up and said. All right, hurry up and ask him. I'm feeling very dizzy again. Qi Rongji leaned back, looking listless. Qin Wanru stood up and walked out of Qi Rongji's room. She went directly to the main room to visit Madame Dowager. Shui Rulin was also there, talking with Madame Dowager in the room. How is Miss Qi? After Qin Wanru saluted, Madame Dowager asked hurriedly. It's not a big deal, but she doesn't believe me. She must ask the monks in the temple to find someone skilled in medicine to treat her. Qin Wanru sat on the spring stool beside Madame Dowager and said with a smile. What does she want to do? Shui Rulin frowned. No one in Qin's mansion liked Miss Qi very much. I don't know either. Mother, why don't we ask a monk to ask? Qin Wanru shook her head and suggested. Could something have happened? We are on the mountain and only your grandmother and I are here. Shui Rulin did not believe Qi Rongji. Mother will be fine. We will send more people to keep an eye on her. If we don't send people to treat her, they will say that our Qin's mansion didn't take good care of her. They will also say that we didn't help her even when she was sick, Qin Wanru said softly. Hearing this, Shui Rulin fell silent. Qi Rongji might really do that. Go and ask a reception monk. Madame Dowager also thought Qin Wanru's words were reasonable, so she ordered after thinking for a while. Nanny Duan said. Nanny Duan answered and left. Grandma, let me check your pulse. You look much better. Qin Wanru smiled and reached out to Madame Dowager. Well, I do feel that my body is a little more relaxed these days. Sometimes, I'll take a walk with your mother, and I'm not that depressed anymore. Old Grandma said with a smile and stretched out her hand. Qi Rongji did not believe in Qin Wanru's medical skills, but as a grandmother, she believed in it very much. When they were in Jiangzhou, the doctor whom old grandma trusted the most was the master of Jingxin Monastery, and the master of Jingxin Monastery was also the one who helped to make Qin Wanru's body. When they left Jiangzhou, this task fell to Qin Wanru. The master of Jingshin Monastery praised Qin Wanru, which made old grandma feel proud and confident. Qin Wanru put her hand on Madame Dowager's pulse. After checking her pulse, she nodded secretly. Grandma's body was a little better than before. Illness came like a landslide and went away like spinning silk. Grandma's illness would get better and better. Of course, the smoothness of her heart was also the key to taking the initiative. This was also the reason why she took Madame Dowager up the mountain to worship Buddha and deliberately avoided some messy things in Duke Yong's mansion and her own mansion. Grandma's body is indeed much better, but she still can't bear the burden. Grandma, if anything happens in the future, you'd better stay out of it. Qin Wanru put down Madame Dowager's wrist and said meaningfully. This girl. Madame Dowager understood. She reached out to touch her forehead and scolded with a smile. She had experienced a lot of things, so of course she understood the meaning of Qin Wanru's words. Righteousness. That's right. Qin Wanru said coquettishly. Her smile was like a blooming flower, with the unique charm of a girl. Then Wanru should also check mother's pulse. Shui Rulan also came over with a smile and teased. Of course I should also check mother's pulse. Qin Wanru smiled and reached out to hold Shui Rulan's hand. Shui Rulan had also taken good care of her fetus. She followed Qin Wanru's instructions and was very healthy. Although her belly was not big, it looked very stable. Even her skin became white and tender, which was much better than the thin skin before. After putting down Shui Rulan's hand, Qin Wanru told Shui Rulan what she should pay attention to. They talked and laughed in the room, so they didn't feel that time passed quickly. After a while, Nanny Duan came back with a message. The master in the temple said that there is such a distinguished guest who is proficient in medical skills. But he is a man, so it is really inconvenient for him to treat young Mississippi, Nanny Duan reported. Who is he? The smile on Madame Dowager's face faded, and she asked with a frown. Qin Wanru didn't say anything, but just picked up Nanny Duan with her eyes. She was also very curious about the man who was favored by Qi Rongji. Was she going to abandon Di Yan and find someone better? But she didn't know how Qin Wanru, who had always been in the mansion and didn't go out, knew this kind of thing. Eyes in the crowd unseen by People Fong, became more and more mysterious. It is said that he is a young child from a high official's mansion. He just arrived at Huaguang Temple today, Nanny Duan said. A young child from a high official's family. This is indeed a little inappropriate. Madame Dowager said hesitantly. Not only was there a difference between a man and a woman, but he was not a doctor. If she invited someone to come over to see a doctor, he must be willing. But she couldn't leave Qi Rongji in this state. Just now, I told this monk that we have a young lady who is sick. The monk said that he could go and ask for her, but he couldn't guarantee that he would be able to. Nanny Duan hesitated and said with a wry smile. She could only say so at that time. As for whether it would work or not, it depended on the young child. He just arrived at Huaguang Temple. He had good medical skills, a young child, and a high official's family. She was inexplicably moved. Could it be him? If that was the case, he would have to help Qi Rongji today. Grandma, I'll go and tell Qi Rongji. If the child really comes over, let him help to see a doctor. If he doesn't come over, we can only think of another way. Qin Wanru thought for a while and proposed to Madame Dowager. Madame Dowager nodded helplessly. Now this was the only way. Even if she felt that it was inappropriate for a young man who was not a doctor to see a doctor, it seemed that this was the only way at the moment. Qin Wanru got up and went to Qi Rongji's room. In the room, Qi Rongji was still lying on the bed weakly. When she saw Qin Wanru coming in, she was happy at first and involuntarily looked behind her. When she saw Qin Wanru enter the door and sit down, and no one came in behind her, she said in an unkind tone, Qin Wanru, where is the person you invited? I can't invite him. He is a noble child, and not everyone can invite him. Qin Wanru said with a faint look, what I can do is to wait here and see if this child is willing or not. Qi Rongji was overjoyed and asked, he is a noble child. Nanny Duan said that he is a noble child from a high-ranking official's family and has excellent medical skills, but he may not necessarily treat people. You have to be mentally prepared. It's not that I don't want to invite him for you, it's just that he is of a high status and he is unwilling to. Qin Wanru said meaningfully. If he can't invite him, won't he say that you are from Ningyuan Army General's mansion? Qi Rongji was not very happy and glared at Qin Wanru. Qi Rongji, you have to know that this is the capital city, not Jiangzhou. My father is just a small official, and you are nothing. Qin Wanru sneered and rebuked her rudely. Qi Rongji was so angry that her face turned red. She secretly gritted her teeth and stared at Qin Wanru viciously, clenching the quilt tightly. When she married into a rich and powerful family, she would directly trample Qin Wanru to death. She dared to humiliate her again and again. She would not let go of the Qin sisters, who were a pair of bitches. It was also their fault that he had fallen to this state. Seeing that Qi Rongji stared at her viciously but did not speak, Qin Wanru ignored her and calmly picked up a sachet beside the bed. At first glance, it seemed to be quite exquisite. Did the servant girls not handle it well and drop it on the bed? The sachet in her hand was taken away fiercely. Qin Wanru raised her head and saw Qi Rongji's cold face. Take your dirty hands away. Don't touch my things. Qin Wanru, I tell you, if you don't help me find a doctor, if something happens to me in Huaguang Temple today, none of you will be well. She didn't believe that she couldn't find a doctor. Ningyuan Army General's mansion was a new noble. Although its rank was a little low, it still had this ability. Anyway, she had to see this person today no matter what. Chapter 234. Qi Rongji was overjoyed, while Qin Wanru was thoughtful. Hurry up and invite him in. Qi Rongji couldn't contain her joy and said. She didn't expect it to be so simple and Qin Yuru didn't lie to her. Nanny Duan, wait a minute and invite this child in. Qin Wanru said. The two of them spoke almost at the same time. Yes, second miss. Nanny Duan said. Then there was the sound of leaving. Qi Rongji was so angry that she wanted to smash the teacup on the table to the ground. An old maid dared to ignore her. Help your miss tidy up. Qin Wanru stood up and turned to hide behind the bed curtain, while instructing Chuanyi and Chuanxi. You don't have to put down the gauze curtain. It depends on his complexion later, Qi Rongji said shyly. Qin Wanru stopped and then walked in speechlessly. Qi Rongji really dared to covet this person. She didn't know her identity. In the last life, the reason why he married her was that his health had collapsed at that time, and she was just a woman who brought him happiness. He didn't care about her identity at all. But in this life, with Wen Shiqi's identity and reputation, how could Qi Rongji covet him? Qin Wanru didn't know who gave her this fantasy and even let her come to her grandmother and mother. But there were only a few people in the Qin's mansion, so it was not difficult to find out. Yu Jie brought a stool in for Qin Wanru, and Qin Wanru sat behind the gauze curtain. Outside, Chuanyi and Chuanxi worked together to tidy up the bed and rearrange the stool. It was a mess. Qi Rongji also happily asked them to prepare new tea. Originally, there was nothing going on, but now there was a lot of mess. Hearing Nanny Duan's voice coming from outside, the inside slightly calmed down. Please come in. Qi Rongji said softly. She leaned into the room, looking even more delicate and fragile. The door was pushed open, and Wen Shiqi came in. His light lake-colored clothes made him look gentle and extraordinary. His appearance was very outstanding, and he walked gracefully and freely. The nobleness and elegance of the weather made him look very attractive. His gentle face made others like him very much. Child Wen, please sit down. Nanny Duan came to accompany him. When Shichi sat in front of the stool in front of the bed without looking sideways. Looking at the white and tender hand hanging out, he frowned slightly and asked gently, "Do you have a handkerchief?" Take a woman's pulse what's more, it was a strange young woman. Of course, she had to fold a handkerchief on her wrist. There was a big barrier between men and women, but now this lady's maid seemed to have forgotten. Yes, this servant will go get it immediately. Chun-Yi looked at Chun-Shi and hurriedly apologized. Then, she covered Chi-Rongji's hand with a white handkerchief. When Shichi closed his eyes and quietly felt the pulse. Come on. On the bed, Chi-Rongji stared at Wen Shichi's handsome face with a flushed face. The more she looked at him, the happier she felt. He was so handsome and gentle, and he was the son of the deputy prime minister. If she could marry such a good man, it would be much better than Di Yan, who was such a scumbag. No, it was not much better. It was like she was going to heaven. How could there be such a gentle and elegant man in the world? Moreover, he was handsome and outstanding. Chi-Rongji felt that her heart was about to jump out and she was overjoyed. Looking at her wrist, she found that his slender and powerful hand was holding hers. It would be great if there was no handkerchief. The sachet in her hand silently moved closer to his hand. Of course, it did not fall because she forgot to put it away. She had deliberately and carefully left it on the bed. Qin Wanru saw it clearly and was speechless behind the gauze handkerchief. Miss, can you please change your hand? When Shichi put down Chi-Rongji's hand and asked gently. His voice was like a spring breeze. Chi-Rongji was dizzy, so she reached out to change her hand and put it in front of him. However, when Shichi stepped back and told Chun-Yi beside him, put a handkerchief on it. Yes. Chun-Yi did not dare to disobey. She hurriedly came over, put Chi-Rongji's previous hand into the quilt, and put a handkerchief on it. When Shichi reached out again, and the room became quiet. Child, how is my body? Is there anything wrong? I felt dizzy when I visited my elders, and then fainted. I still feel very uncomfortable now. Chi-Rongji could not help asking. Her voice was so soft that it was not like her usual self. She felt that she had taken a fancy to this child when in front of her at first sight, and also decided to marry him. When Shichi frowned slightly, and then put down Chi-Rongji's wrist with a calm look. His eyes slid over the bright and beautiful sachet on the quilt, and he slowly raised his head. Miss, can I see your face? Yes. Chi-Rongji said in a sweet voice. When Shichi looked at Chi-Rongji generously, and then asked her to stick out her tongue. Then he stood up and seemed to be about to write a prescription. Child, is there anything wrong with my body? Chi-Rongji asked anxiously. When Shichi looked back at Chi-Rongji's anxious face, smiled, and said gently, Miss, you are in good health. Nothing serious. You just need to rest and think less. Behind the gauze curtain, Qin Wanru's face involuntarily turned sweet. When Shichi expressed his displeasure, and hinted Chi-Rongji not to think about anything improper. Chi-Rongji did not understand, and still said in a sweet voice. She reached out and touched her head. But I still have a headache, and it seems that I have a fever. Do you want to touch it? Her words were so shameless that Qin Wanru did not know what to say. Since when Shichi was a real doctor, it was unreasonable for her to take the young man's hand and ask him to touch her head, not to mention that when Shichi was just a strange young man. Do you have a pen and ink? When Shichi's voice was very gentle, but he asked Chun-Yi, as if he did not hear what Chi-Rongji said just now. Chun-Yi hurriedly answered and went to prepare. In a short while, the pen and ink were ready. When Shichi picked up the written prescription, looked at it, and said to Chun-Yi, who was serving beside him, please ask the person who can make the decision to come out. I have something to explain in this prescription. The person who can make the decision. Chun-Yi was stunned for a moment, and looked at Chi-Rongji, who was lying on the bed. For a moment, she did not know whether he was talking about her Mississippi. But with so many servant girls around, it was not appropriate for a sick miss to read the prescription by herself. Qin Wanru walked out from behind the curtain helplessly. Did Wen Shiqi find out that there was someone behind the curtain? Child 1. After walking out, Qin Wanru bowed sideways to Wen Shiqi. Wen Shiqi turned around, and his eyes fell on Qin Wanru. In fact, they had not seen each other for a while. At that time, she looked like a little girl, but now she had grown a lot. He was stunned for a moment, but then he looked natural and handed the prescription in his hand to Qin Wanru. Let this miss take this prescription for a period of time. He lowered his eyes gently and politely, and did not look at Qin Wanru. How long is it for a period of time? Qin Wanru asked in confusion. She had checked on Qi Rongji before, and knew that she was not sick at all. Why should she take medicine? About a month, Wen Shiqi said lightly. Qin Wanru looked at the medicine on the prescription and suddenly felt speechless. In fact, she had known that Wen Shiqi was an excellent strategist, but she had never seen him deal with a woman in such a black-bellied way. It seemed that Qi Rongji had really offended him. The medicine on the prescription was not for a doctor. They were all for calming the mind, and each medicine was extremely bitter. If Qi Rongji took this medicine directly, the bitterness would not go away for several months. Thank you, child. Next time, I have to trouble you to change the prescription. It is not good for the patient to change a doctor in the middle of a month. May I know your name and where you live now? Next time, I can ask my servant girl to invite you to my mansion to see a doctor. Qi Rongji was overjoyed when she heard it, and her eyes were full of love. She thought that Wen Shiqi must also like her. Otherwise, he would not let her take medicine for about a month. Other people took medicine once in 7 days, but she took so much medicine just to see her more often. Hearing Qi Rongji's words becoming more and more explicit, Qin Wanru really did not know what to say. Qi Rongji really dared to say that she really treated Wen Shiqi as a doctor and ordered him to see a doctor next time. She picked up the prescription at hand and handed it to Chun Shi. Ask someone to go down the mountain to get the prescription for your miss. Yes, miss. Chun Shi took it. Child 1, let me see you out. Qin Wanru reached out and said. She originally wanted to see Wen Shiqi. Since he was here, she naturally would not let go of such an opportunity. Qin Wanru originally thought that he would go up the mountain tomorrow, but she did not expect that he had already come today. It was a surprise. Wen Shiqi nodded, turned around and strode away. Qin Wanru followed him out of the room, ignoring the extremely rude words that Qi Rongji had said just now. Seeing the two of them go out of her door one after another as if they were very familiar with each other, Qi Rongji was so angry that her face turned blue. The hatred in her eyes almost burned through Qin Wanru's back. As Qin Yuru said, Qin Wanru would definitely stop her. As long as the person she liked was outstanding, Qin Wanru would definitely snatch him. She was not reconciled. She liked him first. If Qin Wanru dared to snatch him, she would kill her. Qin Wanru took Wen Shiqi to see old Madame Qin and said goodbye. Old Madame Qin also thanked him profusely. Knowing that he was the son of the Prime Minister, she increasingly felt that the child in front of her was not only a good person but also had a good family background. Suddenly, she looked back at Qin Wanru beside her and inexplicably had a new idea. After a few words, Wen Shiqi stood up and said goodbye politely. Old Grandma nodded with a smile and then said to Qin Wanru, "Zhuozhua, our mansion is indebted to Child Wen. You go and see him off." Qin Wanru was stunned for a moment and did not understand what old grandma meant. But she did what she wanted. She did have something to say to Wen Shiqi, so she did not refuse. She stood up and said to old grandma, "Yes, grandma." Wen Shiqi glanced at Qin Wanru and did not refuse. He only said politely to old grandma and then turned to leave behind Qin Wanru. Chapter 235. They went out of the gate of the courtyard. When Shichi walked to a path on the left. Qin Wanru hesitated for a moment, but she didn't stop and followed him. Yujie followed her closely 2 steps behind her. After a few steps, they turned a corner and saw a bamboo forest. The bamboo leaves rose and fell in the wind, which inexplicably made people feel desolate. When Shichi kept walking forward with his hands clasped behind his back, but he didn't walk fast, so that Qin Wanru could catch up with him. They walked all the way until they reached another corner. When Shichi stopped, turned his head, and looked at Qin Wanru with confusion. Qin Wanru smiled slightly, took 2 steps forward, and bowed sideways to him. When Shichi raised his head, and his handsome eyes still fell on Qin Wanru's face. He still looked confused. Qin Wanru felt a little embarrassed under his gaze. She coughed in a low voice and was about to say something to break the awkward situation. However, when Shichi turned around again and said slowly while walking, "My cousin grew up in our mansion. She doesn't like to go out and has almost no good relationship with other misses. My brothers and I all treat her as a younger sister." Qin Wanru was stunned at first, and then she smiled and said while walking, "Your cousin is really an introvert." This meant that when Shichi had listened to what she said that day. This was good. Her warning worked. With Wen Shichi's intelligence, if he had not thought that his brother would hurt him, he would never have been hurt. "So, second Miss Qin, tell me, how do you know about my cousin? And how do you know that there is something between my second brother and my cousin?" Wen Shichi suddenly stopped and turned around. His sharp eyes fell on Qin Wanru's face. His eyes were deep, and his gaze was aggressive. He had never doubted the relationship between his second brother and his cousin before, but after Qin Wanru said so, he sent someone to investigate it. After the investigation, he was shocked. He had never thought that his second brother had such a good relationship with his cousin, and they even had an ambiguous relationship in private. In the past, his second brother had always cared about his cousin, but in Wen Shichi's eyes, it was just a brother's love for his younger sister. They grew up together. He had never had this kind of thought, and he thought his second brother had never had this kind of thought. In fact, his second brother and his cousin had an ambiguous relationship, but on the other hand, his cousin cared about him very much, which even made him feel uncomfortable sometimes. "I don't know, but I've been dreaming for a few days. It's all about third young master being killed by second young master. I didn't take it seriously at first because I didn't know you at that time. But after I saw you, I felt that it should be you. But I don't know if my dream is real or not, so I just take it as a warning. It's good if there isn't, but if there is, I better be careful." Qin Wanru had long prepared these words. She pondered for a moment, turned her watery eyes out, and looked at several tall bamboos and said slowly and quietly. Being reborn was her biggest secret, and this secret was too shocking. If people knew about it, they would probably treat her as a demon and punish her. How could she warn him without batting an eyelid and make him listen? She needed a reasonable explanation. Otherwise, based on her understanding of Wen Shichi, he would not listen to her. Therefore, he was able to convey some of the things he had seen in his previous life through a dream. Although it was a strange mistake, at least in the ears of some people, it should be something that could be explained. Of course, Qin Wanru didn't think that Wen Shichi was one of them. But so what? Perhaps he would believe her after a few more times. Anyway, no matter how smart he was, he couldn't explain such a strange thing. If she hadn't been reincarnated, she wouldn't believe that such a thing existed in this world. "Second Miss Qin, you have never had any contact with our mansion and you did not know me before. Why did you have this dream again and again and remember it so clearly? What you think about in the day, you dream at night. Even a dream can't be completely illusory." Wen Shichi's eyes fell on Qin Wanru's face. There was a strange peace in his eyes, as if he really believed it, but his words were still sharp. In fact, this Wen Shichi was not the person Qin Wanru was familiar with. In the past, Wen Shichi had always been gentle to Qin Wanru. Even when he was tortured by the disease and was dying, he still smiled gently and had never been so aggressive to Qin Wanru. I don't know why, or, have we met before? Qin Wanru suppressed a trace of fear in her heart and turned her head to look at Wen Shiqi up and down. She looked inexplicable, as if she was really confused. Second Miss Qin, you must be joking. Second Miss Qin has never been to the capital city, and I have never been out of the capital city. As for my cousin, it is impossible for anyone to know. Wen Shiqi fixed his eyes on Qin Wanru, not letting go of the slight expression on her face. Such a gaze made Qin Wanru quite uncomfortable. This Wen Shiqi was so different from the Wen Shiqi in her memory. Could it be that because of her rebirth, Wen Shiqi's character also changed? I really don't know. When I saw you, I just knew that I met you in my dream. Maybe this can be called the fate of the previous life. Qin Wanru bit the corner of her red lips, pinched the handkerchief in her hand, and lowered her head. Such a burning gaze made her feel very uneasy. She was afraid that if she raised her head to look at Wen Shiqi again, he would notice something. Second Miss Qin is the daughter of Ningyuan Army General. I heard that Ningyuan Army General was a general in charge of defense when he was in Jiangzhou. When the rebel army rebelled, he became famous overnight. Now that he has come to the capital city, no one expected that he would become a new noble in the capital city. I think Ningyuan Army General is a very talented and knowledgeable person. Wen Shiqi suddenly smiled, and his eyes became gentle because of the smile. He thought of a possibility, which seemed to make sense. Why did the second Miss of Qin's mansion know about the affairs of his mansion and even know about his cousin sister and second brother so well? This Ningyuan Army General was really not an ordinary person, but his hands were too long. He had just come to the capital city, but he dared to extend his hands to other powerful officials' mansions. Was he not afraid that others would chop his hands off? Hearing Wen Shiqi's words, Qin Wanru knew that he misunderstood. He thought that it was all found out by her father, and then he used her to please him. She raised her head helplessly and said sincerely, "If third young master Wen thinks so, I can't do anything about it. I just want to tell you to be careful of the people around you. As for other things, you really think too much." "I think too much." Wen Shiqi's eyes fell on Qin Wanru's face again. "Of course, third young master Wen thinks too much." Qin Wanru's long eyelashes fluttered, and she said affirmatively again. She didn't expect that her warning would be so successful. What Wen Shiqi said just now actually showed that he took it seriously. He didn't even ask if it was true, which also meant that he had found something. This made Qin Wanru feel a little relieved, but she was also worried. Wen Shiqi suspected him, or rather, his father. Why didn't he know that Wen Shiqi was such a suspicious person before? "Second Miss Qin, have you not been engaged yet?" Wen Shiqi suddenly looked Qin Wanru up and down and said ambiguously. Qin Wanru was stunned for a moment, and then said with a little shame and anger, "What does it have to do with you? This kind of thing could not be discussed between a man and a woman in private. Does your father intend to marry you into our mansion?" Wen Shiqi suddenly said. His words were too straightforward, and the meaning in it shocked Qin Wanru so much that she stared at Wen Shiqi with her bright watery eyes and couldn't even say a word for a moment. "Your father didn't mention it?" Wen Shiqi looked very calm. His handsome eyes fell on Qin Wanru's face, and he calmly analyzed the expression on her face. He found that she was really shocked, and he secretly frowned. "Is it not what I think? Third young master Wen, do you suspect that I have an ulterior motive for approaching you? Do I want to marry into your mansion? Or do I want to marry into your mansion?" In her last life, Qin Wanru had never hidden too many thoughts in front of Wen Shiqi. At this time, when her good intention was suspected like this, she was inexplicably angry and blurted out. "Isn't it?" Wen Shiqi asked in reply. "If third young master Wen thinks so, you can ignore what I said before. As for other things, third young master Wen, you really think too much." Perhaps when I first saw you, I felt that you seemed to be someone I knew and was familiar with, but that was also because of the scene in my dream. There was no other meaning at all. Third young master, when you are a young master from a big family, so you should have heard that one should not speak indecency. After Qin Wanru finished speaking, she turned around and walked back the way she came. She was really a little angry. She had guessed all kinds of reactions from Wen Shiqi, including disbelief, doubt, and surprise, but these were all for his second brother and cousin sister. Unexpectedly, he believed her but doubted her. Moreover, he even suspected that she was deliberately mystifying in order to marry him. Could it be that the Wen Shiqi she met in her last life, who was very trusting of others, was fake? Seeing Qin Wanru leave angrily, Wen Shiqi stood still with his hands clasped behind his back and his eyebrows tightly wrinkled. For a moment, he actually wanted to stop her, which gave him a very strange feeling. This strange feeling had been existing since he found out what had happened in his mansion. He had never thought that his second brother would actually have malicious intentions towards him. He had never thought that his cousin, who had always been gentle, would actually be such a woman in private. He had never thought that his cousin would say such things to his second brother. There were many things that he had never maliciously suspected about his family before. But these were all true. What was even more strange was that these things actually came from a boudoir girl who had never had anything to do with his mansion, which made him have to think more deeply. Did someone want to plot against his mansion? Standing on the path and watching Qin Wanru's figure disappear from his sight, Wen Shiqi withdrew his gaze and began to ponder. Chapter 236. After nodding, Wen Shiqi raised his eyes and looked in the direction of Qin Wanru's message. He felt inexplicably upset. In fact, part of the reason why he came to Huaguang Temple in advance this time was to see Qin Wanru early and inquire about the news. But now he found that he still knew nothing. This feeling was like a light smoke that could not be grasped, which made Wen Shiqi very uncomfortable. Yes, very uncomfortable. Or a very uncomfortable feeling. He must find out about this matter. He turned around and strode away. The moment Qin Wanru entered the yard with Yujie, she was stopped by Chun-Yi timidly. Qin Wanru didn't want to pay attention to Qi Rongji, but after taking 2 steps, she turned a corner and re-entered Qi Rongji's room. She felt that there was something wrong. Qi Rongji's message must have been passed on by someone, and there were even some schemes that she did not know. After entering the room, she did not sit down, but looked at Qi Rongji, who had already stood up. What's the matter? Qin Wanru, you are really a bitch. Qi Rongji gritted her teeth and stood up. She reached out to slap Qin Wanru, but was quickly stopped by Yujie. Qi Rongji, you're living in Qin's mansion now and you're relying on Qin's mansion. This is not Jiangzhou. I really don't know where you get the confidence to think that I'll tolerate you again and again. Qin Wanru said coldly. She raised her bright watery eyes and looked at Qi Rongji's face coldly. He's the one I've chosen. Why are you trying to snatch him from me? Qin Wanru, what on earth do I owe you? Why do you ruin my plans again and again? Qi Rongji looked at Qin Wanru with hatred, her eyes almost spurting fire. The person you chose? Qi Rongji, is this the rule of your Qi's mansion? Qin Wanru raised her eyebrows and asked calmly. Her intuition told her that there was something wrong. Qi Rongji could not be so ignorant. Of course I chose him, or your father and grandmother promised my father to help me find a blind date and chose him. Qi Rongji said with hatred. Qin Wanru was stunned. She looked at Qi Rongji with slight surprise and repeated, the person my father and grandmother chose for you? Yes, he is the one your father and grandmother chose for me. Qin Wanru, don't you know that I even lost my marriage because of your family? Your mansion owes me this. Qi Rongji glared at Qin Wanru and said. The affairs between the Qin's mansion and the Qi's mansion were intertwined and restrained each other. But the cause was really because of the broken engagement between Madame D and Qin Yuru. So, in order to make up for it, father and grandmother wanted to help you choose a good marriage to compensate the Qi clan. And this time, father chose the third young master of the left minister's residence? Qin Wanru sat down on the chair beside her and asked lightly. Yes, third young master Wen is not only good-looking, but also talented. I heard that he will take part in the imperial examination this time. With his talent, there should be no big problem. Qi Rongji said proudly, as if Wen Shiqi had a relationship with her now. You came to Huaguang Temple this time because of this? Did my father tell you that? Qin Wanru asked casually as she carefully sorted out Qi Rongji's words. Almost. Qi Rongji raised her head and said directly. What do you mean by almost? Did my father tell you personally, or did someone else pass it on? If it was passed on by someone else, why did my father pass it on to someone else? Looking at Qi Rongji's expression, Qin Wanru knew that there was something fishy in the so-called looking at each other. As for her father, the thing about Qin Yuru had made him dizzy before. At this time, he had no energy to help Qi Rongji build a bridge and look at Wen Shiqi. But thinking of Wen Shiqi's words just now, she inexplicably felt that there was something behind it. Otherwise, Wen Shiqi would not say this to her. Could it be that her father really had contact with the left minister's residence, and this contact directly caused Wen Shiqi to misunderstand her? Although she did not want to admit it, Qin Wanru still felt that there was a trace of possibility. Even if your father did not tell me personally, it is almost the same. It is better for me to look at each other. Now I also feel that it is very good. But why are you so close to third young master Wen? You even hang out with him. You are a man and a woman alone. Aren't you afraid that your reputation will be tarnished? Qi Rongji snorted and said unwillingly. Then she changed her expression into a sad one. Qin Wanru, you are still young and good-looking. Your father is now a new noble in the capital city. What kind of man can you not marry? Do you have to steal the man I like? What happened in Jiangzhou was caused by our ignorance. It is not a life and death feud. Do you have to hate me so much that you want to ruin my marriage? Not a life and death feud. Qin Wanru's eyes fell on Qi Rongji's beautiful face, and her lips slightly curved into a sneer. If she really died, how could she find her to take revenge? She would never forget that Qi Rongji had either wanted to disfigure her or kill her. This was not a life and death feud because she had not been killed by Qi Rongji at that time. Qi Rongji, is it possible that what you said was deliberately revealed to you? I can be sure that grandma must not know about it. Otherwise, she would have asked third young master Wen to stay a little longer and would have mentioned you more. Qin Wanru said calmly. Even if your grandma does not know, your father must know. This matter is mainly because of him. Qi Rongji felt guilty, but she still said loudly. He has seen third young master Wen. Qin Wanru's eyes flickered. She really didn't know the relationship between Qin Huayong and Wen Shiqi. After all, in terms of age, they were not suitable for each other. Even if they met by chance, it was unlikely. Then they really met for a purpose. But what could Qin Huayong and Wen Shiqi talk about? Something slipped through her mind, but she could not grasp it for a moment. So today you went up the mountain to pretend to be sick because you know that third young master Wen is proficient in medical skills and you also know that he is in Huaguang Temple? Qin Wanru asked carefully. Yes, I just know. I heard that your father will also come to see him. Anyway, he is helping me to look for him, so I come to see him first. Qi Rongji said in a coquettish manner. You should know this from the words of several servant girls or old maids, right? I guess my father will definitely not tell you about this. My father has not been in the capital for a long time, and now he has just decided. Even if he helps you to look for someone, he will definitely tell your parents first, and then formally discuss this matter. Qin Wanru's cold eyes fell on Qi Rongji, as if she could see through her heart. This gaze made Qi Rongji involuntarily turn her head, but she immediately came to her senses and looked at Qin Wanru angrily. She stared at her fiercely and said, "So what? What does this matter have to do with you?" "Of course it has nothing to do with me." "Then don't look for me." Qin Wanru coldly turned around and seemed to leave. Seeing that she was really going to leave, Qi Rongji was anxious and choked her throat. "Qin Wanru, what do you mean? Why should I look for you? Third young master Wen is mine. If you dare to compete with me, I will fight with you." "Fight with me?" Qin Wanru slightly tilted her head and squinted at Qi Rongji. Qi Rongji only felt that Qin Wanru in front of her had an indescribable majesty and momentum. For a moment, she felt guilty and hateful. She fiercely gritted her teeth and secretly scolded herself for being disappointing. It was just a Qin Wanru. Why should she be afraid of her? She immediately became courageous and snapped, "Yes, even at the cost of my life, I will not let you get what you want." "Qi Rongji, do you know what this place is?" Qin Wanru smiled. Her smile was sweet and elegant, as brilliant as 100 flowers blooming. Even Qi Rongji, who was used to seeing Qin Wanru's face, was stunned at this moment. But the next moment, she immediately looked at Qin Wanru with hostility. "Qin Wanru, what do you mean?" "This is Huaguang Temple, a royal temple. There are mountain roads on the way up and down the mountain. There are countless people coming and going here every day. Among these countless people, if 1 or 2 people are missing, what will happen? Do you think it will be investigated clearly?" Qin Wanru smiled slightly. Qi Rongji's heart trembled, and her legs were weak. The momentum that she had tried hard to muster before suddenly dispersed. After a few steps back, she pointed at Qin Wanru and said loudly, "You, what do you want to do?" "I don't want to do anything. I just want to tell you that if something really happens to you in Huaguang Temple, even if my father has a place with poor supervision, he can do nothing about it. Can your father really become enemies with my father because of you? I heard that your father also wants to go to the capital city. Is there another agreement between you and my father?" Qin Wanru said slowly, and her eyes fell on Qi Rongji's body calmly. You. Qi Rongji was really panicked and trembled all over. "In fact, when you went up the mountain today, you were already half dead. Originally, you went up the mountain because you eavesdropped on others' words, and then you casually found an excuse. Grandma and I didn't know anything on the mountain, and you bumped into it. Whatever happens after that has nothing to do with the person behind the scenes, but it can be an excuse to deal with Grandma and me. Qi Rongji, if it is really my father who looks for you, do you really think that all the servants will know before the conclusion is made?" Qin Wanru's eyes fell on Qi Rongji with a little sarcasm, but such obvious sarcasm made Qi Rongji's body tremble more and more. "Qi Rongji, are you going to be knocked down by a car on the way down the mountain, or are you going to be kidnapped by an unknown gangster? Although it is unlikely that this kind of thing will happen under the rule of the emperor, you are such a weak girl. If you are kidnapped, even if you are sent back, your reputation will be ruined." Qin Wanru said calmly. She knew that Qi Rongji was already suspicious, and she also knew that she was afraid. "No, it's impossible. I will go with you." Qi Rongji's face kept changing. After a long while, she gritted her teeth and said, "Since someone has a way to send you to Huaguang Temple, he doesn't intend to let you leave easily. Qi Rongji, you should be happy that you can become a useless chess piece to plot against me and Grandma. After all, you have made a lot of trouble with me in the past. Now that you have an accident, he can definitely perfectly push the blame to me." Chapter 237. "Tell me, what's going on?" Qin Wanru nodded and said in a lazy and indifferent voice. Qi Rongji gritted her teeth fiercely, clenched her fists, and then slowly loosened them. Madame of Duke Xing came to the mansion that day and talked with Madame D. I was curious and wanted to see Madame of Duke Xing secretly. I didn't expect to hear 2 old maids talking about my marriage on the way. Qi Rongji paused and looked at Qin Wanru. Qin Wanru still lowered her head, as if she didn't notice Qi Rongji's gaze. She still turned over the handkerchief in her hands slowly. One of the two old maids is from Duke Xing's mansion, and the other is Madame D's maid. They talked about the matter that your father helped me to look for the third young master of the left Prime Minister's mansion. They said that the third young master is like pearls and jade, with a good reputation and a good family background. They also said that if he took the imperial examination in spring this time, he would definitely pass. At that time, there would be more people who liked him. At that time, there will be more people who will like him, so it's better to choose him earlier. Since she had started, Qi Rongji no longer hid and told them everything. The cause of this matter was an accident, and it was related to Qi Rongji. Hearing the two old maids praise the third young master of Wen, Qi Rongji was overjoyed. However, the two old maids said that Qin Huayong didn't know whether to choose Qi Rongji or Qin Wanru now. Although Qi Rongji was older and Qin's mansion owed the Qi's mansion, Qin Wanru was his daughter after all. Compared with Qi Rongji, Qin Wanru was closer. Then they said that the third young master of Wen happened to be in Huaguang Temple. They also said that Qin Wanru might have seen the third young master of Wen. With Qin Wanru's appearance, the third young master of Wen might have liked her. At that time, Qin Huayong didn't need to hesitate anymore. He could leave such a good son-in-law to his daughter. Even if the Qi's mansion asked later, he could only say that it had nothing to do with him and it was the third young master of Wen's choice. Of course, he couldn't blame others for not choosing Qi Rongji. The two old maids even joked that if Qi Rongji knew it now and came up the mountain immediately, she might have a chance. After all, she was good-looking, and compared with Qin Wanru, she was more attractive to men. As for the solution, it was best to pretend to be sick, because it was said that third young master Wen's medical skills were superb, so, in a hurry, you thought of an idea and came up the mountain. After listening to Qi Rongji's words, Qin Wanru had already guessed the cause and effect. With a flash of sharpness in her eyes, she looked at Qi Rongji and asked with contempt and sarcasm in her eyes. Is there something wrong? Qi Rongji blushed and scolded her loudly. Even she herself felt that there was something wrong when she retold the story. However, for fear of appearing weak in front of Qin Wanru, she had to force herself to say it. Qi Rongji, don't tell me you really don't know if there's anything wrong or not. At that time, you will lose your life, and this matter will be pushed to me and my grandmother, even though we know nothing about it. Of course, you're the unluckiest one here. You might lose your life or your reputation, but no matter what, you're completely ruined. Qin Wanru sneered faintly. These words, one after another, struck Qi Rongji like a bolt of lightning. She was dumbfounded and froze on the spot. The blush on her face faded away and turned into a sheet of white. She stood there in a daze. Seeing that she was dumbfounded with fear, Qin Wanru knew that her words had an effect. She said coldly, at this time, Qi Rongji, you should know who wants to plot against you, right? Madame D and Qin Yuru, it must be them. Qi Rongji's face turned blue again, and she fiercely crumpled the handkerchief in her hand. It's good that you know. Qin Wanru smiled coldly and turned to leave. Qin Wanru, don't go. Are you going to be killed by them in vain? Qi Rongji stepped forward and was about to pull Qin Wanru's sleeve, but was stopped by Yujie. She shouted unwillingly. It's not me who will get into trouble. Now I've saved your life. As for whether you will take things too hard and get into trouble, I can't do anything about it. Good advice can't persuade a damned person. In this world, many damned people will die again and again. What does it have to do with me? Qin Wanru stopped slightly, but she didn't turn around and said in a low voice. You're so mean. Qi Rongji's face became more and more ugly. If you have the ability, you can deal with it yourself. It has nothing to do with me. Qin Wanru smiled slightly, turned around and strode away. She didn't care about Qi Rongji anymore. Behind her came the sound of something falling, and then there were the panicked cries of the two servant girls. It seemed that Qi Rongji vented her anger on something again. Miss, are you okay? Yujie quickly caught up with Qin Wanru, looked at Qin Wanru's face carefully, and asked in a low voice. Qin Wanru shook her head and frowned tightly. Now she might be sure that Duke Xing's mansion must have a connection with her. She rubbed the handkerchief in her hand and put it down again. She seemed to have something broken in her heart, but she couldn't find the place to hit the last hammer. Perhaps as long as she hit the last hammer, all the truth could be completely presented in front of everyone. As long as she hit the place with the most strength, it would be all right. But where was the point of strength? She took a deep breath and raised her head. Suddenly, she saw Shui Rulan's concerned eyes in the corridor. Judging from Shui Rulan's standing posture, she should have been here for some time. Qin Wanru didn't know how much she had heard. Biting her lip, her eyes were inexplicably filled with tears, and her clear watery eyes were covered with a layer of mist. Seeing Qin Wanru looking at her, Shui Rulan sighed and walked slowly from the corridor. Her eyes fell on Qin Wanru's face with pity. She walked to Qin Wanru and reached out to hold her in her arms without saying a word. After a long while, Qin Wanru pushed her away and wiped the tears on her face with a handkerchief. When she was about to speak, she saw Shui Rulan shake her hand and point to the room on the side. It was the place where Shui Rulan temporarily rested. She had her own room, but she often came to accompany Madame Dowager. Madame Dowager was afraid that Shui Rulan would be tired, so she specially found a room for Shui Rulan to rest in. Qin Wanru nodded knowingly. They went to the room where Shui Rulan temporarily rested one after another. After Qianghua served tea, she retreated to the door. Qin Wanru signaled to Yujie, and Yujie also obediently walked to the door and guarded with Qianghua. Wanru, I don't want to hide something from you, but your grandmother said it's better not to let you know. But I actually don't think so. For this kind of thing, whether it's good or not, you have to know it. Your grandmother thinks it's for your own good, but I don't think so. Shui Rulan sighed. She saw some things, but she actually didn't know very clearly. So she just consciously helped Qin Wanru to inquire about information, but she didn't know much. Mother, tell me. Qin Wanru's eyes were slightly red, and she lowered her head. You are not my cousin's biological daughter. Your biological father should have saved my cousin's life, so he entrusted you to my cousin and let my cousin raise you as his biological daughter. But you seem to have a mother, who was separated in the war. As for other things, I can't find out for a while. Shui Rulan sighed guiltily and told Qin Wanru the bits and pieces of information she had recently inquired from Madame Dowager and Qin Huayong. I still have a mother. Qin Wanru's watery eyes suddenly widened, and her heart seemed to be hit by something, which was sour and painful. Although she had never asked, it didn't mean that she didn't think about it. Her breath involuntarily became a little faster, and her eyes were full of admiration. Her mother. Was she still alive now? There should be, but her whereabouts are unknown. Later your grandmother also sent people to look for her, but they haven't found her, and don't know where she is now. Seeing the expectation in Qin Wanru's eyes, Shui Rulan didn't say her other conjecture in the end. A woman was separated from her husband and daughter in the war, and the possibility of her surviving was too small. But there was a little hope in Qin Wanru, and she didn't want to cut it off. Her words were extremely implicit. Is this seal mine? Qin Wanru tremblingly untied her neckline, took out the seal from inside, and eagerly wanted to get the proof from Shui Rulan. Shui Rulan looked at her seal, and helplessly shook her head to Qin Wanru, who was longing for it, and said, I don't know this seal, and I have never seen it before. But the Fenghua glazed cup seems to be related to you. That night when Madame D asked your grandmother to take out the Fenghua glazed cup, your grandmother sighed to me and said that Madame D was too greedy, and that the cup was originally yours. So the Fenghua glazed cup is also mine? Qin Wanru really didn't expect this, because Chu Luchen asked her for it at that time. Yes, it is yours. Maybe you can find a way to ask about the Fenghua glazed cup. Shui Rulan thought for a while and said, "It is also possible to find some people and things from it. As for other things, your grandmother said that she is not very clear." Shui Rulan really didn't know what happened at that time. It happened to be the period when Shui Rulan got married, and when she came back, Qin Wanru was already there. She didn't even know whether Qin Wanru was Qin Huayong's biological daughter. The explanation given by old grandma was that Qin Wanru had been raised outside the mansion, and she was brought back recently. As for other things, old grandma didn't let her ask more. After coming out of Shui Rulan's room, Qin Wanru didn't go back to her own room. She told old grandma the excuse of going to see the purple bamboo forest in the temple, and then walked out of the courtyard with Yujie. Not long after she left, Qi Rongji also found a similar excuse and followed her out of the courtyard with Chun Yi. As for Chun Shi, she quietly went down the mountain. Did Imperial Grandmother see it? Chu Luchin said casually, and walked slowly to the path. This time, he didn't use a wheelchair. Yes, I have seen it, but I'm afraid that she doesn't like it very much. Xiao Xuanzi peeped at Chu Liuchen's face and said cautiously. She doesn't like it very much. Then let Imperial Grandmother like it more. Chu Luchen said casually, as if what he said was just like the weather. His handsome eyes were slightly raised, with a little teenager's sloppiness. Child, what do you mean? Xiao Xuanzi said cleverly. This king means that it's not interesting. Chu Liuchen's handsome smile was so bright that two misses passing by couldn't help but stop and look at him passing by, feeling shy. Child, you mean? Xiao Xuanzi didn't understand for a moment, and subconsciously glanced at the two misses on the roadside. Chapter 238. Two ferocious guards appeared out of nowhere and each of them dragged the two dainty young ladies out of the room. The servant girls screamed in fear and chased after them. Qin Wanru suddenly saw this scene and actually wanted to avoid it. However, Prince Chen's eyes had turned to her, so she could only walk over and bow sideways. Child, what a coincidence. Qin Wanru raised her head and quietly looked at Chu Liuchen's face. Unfortunately, I'm waiting for you. Chu Luchen spread his robe and naturally walked a few steps forward. Seeing that Qin Wanru was stunned and didn't follow him, his handsome face showed some displeasure. Come over here. After saying that, he continued to walk forward. Qin Wanru had no choice but to follow him. Fortunately, this prince didn't walk fast. Qin Wanru was thin and had short legs, so she could keep up with him. Have you grown taller? Chu Luchen suddenly stopped and waited for Qin Wanru to stand beside him. He used his hand to measure the top of Qin Wanru's head, and then compared it with his own height. His long and narrow beautiful eyes were filled with an unfathomable smile. You've grown shorter. Qin Wanru raised her head and looked at Chu Luchen. She hadn't seen him for a long time. Surprisingly, Prince Chen had grown a lot taller. The gap between them didn't narrow, but widened, which made Qin Wanru feel a little frustrated. She stepped back and stood a little further away from Chu Luchen. She said seriously, Child, I've grown taller. Grown taller? Why are you so short? Chu Luchen slightly tilted his head and gestured in front of Qin Wanru to show the gap between the two of them. He seemed to be a little puzzled. His expression and action made Qin Wanru blush. She stared at Chu Luchen with a little anger and asked, Where are you going, child? She simply didn't want to talk about height with him. It would hurt their relationship. Looking at the purple bamboo forest. Chu Luchen put down his hand in a good mood, turned his head and walked forward with his hands behind his back. Child, are you also going to the purple bamboo forest? Qin Wanru said in surprise. It was an accident to meet Chu Luchen here, and it was even more unexpected that they were going to the same place. Why? Can't I go? Chu Luchen asked with interest. Prince can certainly go, but... Qin Wanru hesitated, wondering if she could find an excuse to go back now. But what? Chu Luqian said lazily. His eyes looked as gentle as jade, and his actions became more leisurely. His behavior was more like a cool breeze and bright moon. But inexplicably, Qin Wanru felt that if she told the truth, she might not even know how she would die. She immediately smiled knowingly and said, "I'm afraid that I'll disturb the prince's quiet and elegant mood." "I have indeed disturbed you." Chu Luqian nodded and smiled. His immortal-like temperament immediately became a little enchanting and irritating. Qin Wanru suddenly wanted to stop and turn around willfully. Could they still talk properly and enjoy the scenery? Not everyone can see the purple bamboo forest of Huaguang Temple. Chu Luqian raised his eyebrows and smiled as if he didn't see the vivid anger on Qin Wanru's face. At this time, he looked like a beautiful young man falling from the clouds. He was handsome and elegant, and even the smile on his face showed the gentleness and handsomeness from his bones. "Why can't I see it? Isn't it said that the purple bamboo forest of Huaguang Temple is very famous? Since I can't see it, how can anyone know? I'm also very famous, but there shouldn't be many people who have seen me, right?" Qin Wanru said lazily. These words made Qin Wanru speechless for a while. In the world, only Prince Chen was known to be an emperor. It was true that the throne of the deposed crown prince was taken away by the current emperor. The meaning of this was enough to make many people's imagination soar. As for whether it was true or not, it didn't matter. Most people felt that Prince Chen had a bad life. Otherwise, the whole world would be his. Qin Wanru secretly complained. She really couldn't answer these words. She raised her head and saw that Chu Luqian was actually waiting for her to reply. She smiled twice and said, "Haha. Wasn't it just haha?" How could she, a weak girl, dare to participate in this kind of thing? In the purple bamboo forest of Huaguang Temple, there are tablet inscriptions left by the sages. Because there are many of them, it is also called the predecessor tablet forest. If you want to walk around the periphery of the purple bamboo forest, you can. But if you want to go to the inside of the purple bamboo forest and see the predecessor tablet forest, you can only enter with the permission of the abbot of Huaguang Temple. Chu Luqian looked at her ambiguously. This time, he didn't embarrass her, but said slowly, "Then I'll walk around on the side." Qin Wanru said knowingly. On the one hand, of course, she didn't have such a big face to let the abbot of Huaguang Temple think highly of her and let her enter the purple bamboo forest. On the other hand, of course, it was because Qin Wanru actually didn't want to accompany Prince Chen to walk around at all. After just a few steps, the prince's face was not very good again. There was a weak flush on his face. Although it reflected his delicate eyebrows and eyes as if they were dyed with bright colors, which made people unable to move their eyes, it also showed his weakness. "I want to go inside and have a look. I have already talked with the abbot." Chu Luqian's voice was lazy and gentle. If people who were not familiar with him, they would really think that he, the sick and weak Prince Chen, was such a harmless and gentle handsome young man. "Prince, this time I am accompanying my grandmother and mother to go up the mountain." Qin Wanru reluctantly bit her cherry lips and hinted. She would not be confused by Chu Luqian's bright and harmless appearance. "Your grandmother and mother are both adults. Do you still need to take care of them?" Chu Luqian glanced at Qin Wanru with displeasure. "Do you not want to accompany me to walk around?" These words were different from the gentleness just now. There was coldness and majesty that Qin Wanru couldn't ignore. "How come?" "Prince, you think too much." Qin Wanru rubbed her handkerchief and hurriedly stopped her thoughts. "Qin Wanru, do you have a pet name?" Chu Luqian changed the topic too fast. Qin Wanru couldn't respond for a moment. She opened her bright watery eyes in surprise and asked in astonishment, "What? Pet name? Do you have any pet name?" Chu Luqian said with a smile. It seemed that he was in a good mood again. "I have one, but it's not very pleasant. Only my grandmother calls me by it." Qin Wanru hesitated for a moment, but still felt it was better to be sensible and tell the truth. What's your name? Chu Luchen asked curiously. It's Zhuozhuo. Qin Wanru answered helplessly. Her pink cheeks were slightly flushed, and she looked more delicate and smart. Zhuozhuo. Good, you deserve the name Zhuozhuo. Chu Luchen laughed, and there was some meaning on his peerless face. Then I will call you Zhuozhuo from now on. Prince, this is what my grandmother calls me. Qin Wanru unconsciously raised her voice and said unhappily. Zhuozhuo, you don't like it? Chu Luchen suddenly stopped and tilted his head to look at Qin Wanru. His pair of handsome eyes were hooked and looked around. Even though Qin Wanru knew that his color was just a layer of his protective color, and it changed from time to time, she was still confused by him for a moment. She hurriedly lowered her head and dared not to look at his extremely handsome face. Was it really good for a man to be more beautiful than a woman? Prince, I'm afraid that when I'm taken out by the guards, Yu Jie can only chase after me. Qin Wanru calmed herself down and tried to show her seriousness. Taken out by the guards? Ha 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 ha. Chu Luchen laughed and stretched out his hand to pat on Qin Wanru's shoulder for a few times. His behavior was natural and free, with a little romantic sense that had not been seen in the past. Zhuozhuo, you're getting more and more interesting. Don't worry, you and I are in the same bathtub, so of course I won't be taken out. But other things. Speaking of this, Chu Luchen gradually stopped smiling, but Qin Wanru was shocked. Inexplicably, she thought of Qin Huayong, and her forehead began to sweat. As expected, the next moment, Chu Liuchen's face became a little cold. I heard that Ningyuan Army General likes Third Young Master Wen, and my people seem to have seen Third Young Master Wen in the temple before. This was not a question but a confirmation. Qin Wanru's back began to sweat. My father, Zhuozhuo, if one day you find that Ningyuan Army General is not the person you imagined, what will you do? Chu Luchen said meaningfully. Prince, you mean? Qin Wanru did not dare to play dumb. Chu Liuchen's eyes were fixed on her face, which made her feel that any expression would appear to be deliberate, so she could only follow his meaning and said. I don't mean anything. I heard that Ningyuan Army General is now the Deputy Commander of the Imperial Guards, so if there are any important affairs in the future, the people of the General's mansion should know something. Qin Wanru's heart was beating fast, and she lowered her head. Prince, please understand. My father's study is not a place where anyone can enter, especially those files, which are not for everyone to read. Zhuozhuo, I heard that you actually used your sword in Ningyuan Army General's study. Why do you look like a weak woman? Ordinary. Chu Luchen stretched out his hand, held Qin Wanru's hand, and picked up her slightly sweaty fingers one by one, and then held them in his palm. His long and wide sleeves fell down, and if one did not see it closely, one really could not see that their hands were holding each other's. Don't fool me with the way you fool others, I will not be happy. This time, Chu Luchen didn't say, this prince, but the meaning of his words shocked Qin Wanru more than saying, this prince. His graceful eyebrows and eyes were picturesque, but they revealed coldness and hostility, which was bone-chilling. Don't forget that you even owe your life to me. Prince, I will not fool you. Qin Wanru bit her lips, and knowingly showed her loyalty. If Prince needs anything, I will go through water and tread on fire without hesitation. Since she had decided to follow this path, she naturally had to show her loyalty. Even if she had to bite the bullet, she had to show her loyalty. This golden coattail was chosen by herself, and now she could not afford to regret it. So, even if she had to kneel, she would walk down step by step. Then I have one thing to ask Zhuozhuo to do for me, how about it? Chu Liuchen's words were almost coaxing, and the smile on his face became as gentle as jade again. What is it? Chapter 239. Qi Rongji came out with Qin Wanru. She had heard that Qin Wanru went to the famous purple bamboo forest of Huaguang Temple. She came out a little farther and didn't see Qin Wanru along the way. But when she turned a corner and saw Qin Wanru standing on the road in front of her, she was immediately overjoyed and hurriedly hid behind a big tree beside her. Chun Yi also hurriedly hid with her. Qin Wanru was with a man. How could Qi Rongji not be excited by such a new discovery? This was what she saw. She wanted to hold Qin Wanru's weakness in her hand and control her. From her angle, she could only see Chu Liuchen's back. Even if she couldn't see his face, his tall and straight figure already made people feel that he must be handsome. Looking at his clothes, the big purple brocade robe was inexplicably a little ostentatious. Qi Rongji frowned. This man's momentum seemed not small. Was he a dignitary that Qin Wanru knew? The aura he exuded was not something that an ordinary person could possess. Even from such a long distance, one could still sense his extraordinary aura. This man seemed to be nobler than third young master one. Qi Rongji could not help but feel her heart warming up. She bit her lip and had other thoughts in her mind. She reached out to straighten her clothes and wanted to go over. She wanted to get to know this man. With her means and appearance, she would definitely be more attractive to men than Qin Wanru, who was as small as a bean sprout. She made up her mind here and showed a trace of complacency on her face. When she wanted to turn out from behind the tree, she suddenly felt that her head was black and her body suddenly softened. Qin Wanru looked at everything in front of her in astonishment. When she wanted to speak, she suddenly felt that she jumped up like a cloud. She was so scared that she almost screamed. When she stood still, the nothingness under her feet was shaking. With a pale face, she looked back at Chu Luchen and found that his face was getting paler. She was so scared that she held his waist tightly and lowered her voice to beg, "Child, let's go down." She didn't think it was a good thing to climb up the tree at this time. The branches swayed, and she felt as if she was stepping on the clouds, or maybe it was not the clouds. Her whole heart had no place to focus. Qin Wanru had never experienced such a thing. Her beautiful watery eyes were full of panic and fear. She instinctively held Chu Luchen tightly like a frightened beast. Qin Wanru's courage was much greater than that of ordinary ladies, but it did not include enjoying the scenery in such a place where there was neither sky nor earth. In particular, the one holding her was Prince Chen, who was so sick that he couldn't even stand. Would he accidentally fall down because he couldn't hold her? Qin Wanru held Chu Liuchen's clothes tightly with her backhand. She didn't know that her face was even worse than Chu Liuchen's at this time. She was really panicked. Chu Liuchen's eyes fell on Qin Wanru's face. Seeing that she was flustered like a child and lacked the calmness and steadiness of the past, she looked more real. Chu Luchen laughed for a while. Although he did not make a sound, everyone could see that he was in a good mood. He loosened his hands that were holding Qin Wanru tightly and said lazily, "My hands are tired. You hold me tighter. If you fall down, you will bear the consequences." Qin Wanru felt that if her eyes could kill, she would have killed Chu Luchen 100 times. But at this time, she didn't dare to argue. This was not a place for arguing. If this bear prince really fell her down, she would die inexplicably. How unwilling she would be. Was this prince really the black-bellied and ruthless Prince Chen? Why did he look like a naughty child, more naughty than Xiao Yuanhao? Qin Wanru hugged Chu Liuchen's waist hard and almost stuck her whole body to him. The faint fragrance of a young girl filled Chu Liuchen's nostrils, which made his heart beat a little faster inexplicably. Suddenly, Chu Luchen frowned and became unhappy. He reached out to hold Qin Wanru and let her lean against the trunk of a big tree on the side. He became impatient. "Don't move, I feel uncomfortable." Prince, where do you feel uncomfortable? Let's go down." Qin Wanru put one hand on his arm and the other on the trunk, and said in a panic. "Don't talk nonsense and watch the show." Chu Luchen said unhappily and looked at Qin Wanru suspiciously. Just now, Qin Wanru was too close to him, which made his breath a little faster. This feeling made Chu Luchen, who had always been in control of everything in his hands, very uncomfortable, as if something had escaped from his control. So at this moment, his gloomy eyes fell on Qin Wanru, trying to find something different from her. Why did she disturb his heart just now? Was it that woman's fragrance? Qin Wanru gritted her teeth and tried to calm herself down. She looked down and looked down. She didn't know where Xiao Xuanzi and Yu Jie were hiding. Not far behind where she and Chu Luchen stood, Qi Rongji and Chun Yi were lying. Further away, a figure was walking slowly. Seeing this figure clearly, Qin Wanru looked at Chu Luchen in astonishment, but found that a pair of handsome and gloomy eyes were staring at her so close. His eyes were gloomy, and she knew it was not a good thing. "Prince, what's wrong with you?" Qin Wanru didn't dare to move, as if she had been stared at by a poisonous snake. She was afraid that she would accidentally provoke Prince Chen. At this time, the situation was not the same as before. If he was in a bad mood, she really didn't know what would happen. Humph! Chu Luchen snorted coldly and stared at her arrogantly, which made Qin Wanru feel puzzled. Just now, she didn't provoke him, right? Seeing Chu Luchen's eyes fall down, Qin Wanru temporarily restrained her panic and looked down. The figure coming over was obviously Wen Shiqi. What did Chu Luchen want to do? Wen Shiqi came here with a servant to enjoy the scenery along the way. He should also come here because of the reputation of the purple bamboo forest. He didn't expect to find Qi Rongji and her servant fainting behind the big tree. After being stunned for a moment, he and his servant went to wake them up. It was a little far from where Qi Rongji fainted, so they couldn't hear clearly what they were talking about. After Qi Rongji woke up, she bowed to Wen Shiqi in a delicate manner. Then they seemed to talk about something congenial, and then they walked together in the direction of the purple bamboo forest. When they walked under the tree where they were hiding, Qin Wanru heard Qi Rongji saying something to Wen Shiqi in that overly delicate voice, which seemed to be particularly enthusiastic. Wen Shiqi's voice seemed a little cold and indifferent. Then they walked over and slowly disappeared from Qin Wanru's eyes. Withdrawing her gaze and moving her stiff figure, Qin Wanru looked at Chu Luchen and suggested cautiously, "Prince, can we go down now?" Although she was in good health and had climbed up walls and trees before, she had never been so flustered. "You want to go down?" Chu Luchen asked with a cold and handsome face. "Yes, since third young master Wen has saved the beauty, can we go down now?" Qin Wanru asked with a smile, her long eyelashes like small fans fluttering twice. She was a little flustered before, but now she finally connected what Chu Luchen had said. "Do you want to see third young master Wen marry this beauty?" Chu Luchen suddenly smiled evilly. "Let Wen Shiqi marry Qi Rongji." Qin Wanru thought it was better to let Wen Shiqi not marry her. Qi Rongji's temperament was not a woman who was good at home and living. Of course, she couldn't say it directly. She didn't know if it was her intuition, but she felt that Prince Chen was inexplicably hostile to Wen Shiqi. What does it have to do with us? It should be something that the elders in third young master Wen's mansion should worry about. Qin Wanru looked at Chu Luchen with her clear watery eyes with a trace of confusion. Her expression somehow pleased Chu Luchen. He reached out and gestured to Qin Wanru, saying, "Come here, hold her." Qin Wanru didn't dare to push him away. She hurriedly reached out and hugged Chu Luchen's waist. Her whole body was stiff and didn't dare to move. She only raised a pair of watery eyes and looked at Chu Luchen with expectation. Her big eyes seemed to be able to speak and clearly reflected Chu Luchen's face. Chu Luchen reached out and held Qin Wanru in his arms with great satisfaction. He smelled a delicate fragrance like plum blossoms and orchids, which was very pleasant. "What fragrance did you apply?" Qin Wanru's reaction was a little slow at this time. She looked at Chu Luchen in a daze and didn't understand what he meant for a moment. But she still shook her head bluntly and said, "I didn't apply any fragrance." "You didn't apply any?" Chu Luchen moved forward and sniffed on Qin Wanru's pink cheeks again. The fragrance was even more refreshing. Now they were getting closer to each other. Qin Wanru tried her best to hide her head. She didn't understand what Chu Luchen was smelling. She really didn't put on any perfume. Nanny Zheng said that a girl at her age didn't need any perfume at all. Zhuozhua, you are too weak. Chu Luchen suddenly smiled maliciously and then loosened his hands. Qin Wanru was so scared that she reached out and hugged him tightly. Her head, which had moved backward before, also tightly leaned forward. The two of them fell from the tree. As soon as they stood firm, Chu Luchen held the tree trunk and coughed violently. Qin Wanru had no choice but to pat his back to help him to calm down. This man was obviously in poor health, but he still wanted to learn martial arts. He didn't know whether his poor health could bear it or not. Chu Luchen finally calmed down. Xiao Xuanzi came out of nowhere and reached out to hand a handkerchief to him. Chu Luchen didn't take it. He raised his handsome face, which was flushed because of coughing, and looked at Qin Wanru. Where is the handkerchief? Qin Wanru looked at him in astonishment and looked at Xiao Xuanzi's hand, which immediately withdrew. She had no choice but to hand the handkerchief in her hand to him. Chu Luchen took the handkerchief and wiped it on his lips. Then, in Qin Wanru's astonished eyes, he naturally put the handkerchief into his cuff. Let's go and have a look at the stone tablet in the purple bamboo forest. Just now third young master Wen and Qi Rongji also went there. If we go there at this time, will we bump into them? Qin Wanru thought for a while and asked, "You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."